watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Good morning, everyone. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki. And we're here all the way through until midday with a show full of all of today's biggest stories and lots of discussions on the issues you care about.
Make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll be reading those out throughout this show. But first, it's time for the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines. The Prime Minister says it's going to take an extraordinary effort to get all adults vaccinated by the end of the year. Plans to offer all over 18-year-olds a booster jab have been brought forward from the end of January. Last night, Boris Johnson said the UK is facing a tidal wave of the new Omicron variants. Well, people in England are being encouraged to work from home today if they can. It's all part of the government's Plan B guidance, which comes into effect today. Measures include the reintroduction of masks in public places and vaccine passports for nightclubs and larger venues. England now joins Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, who already have those restrictions. The leaders of major UK airlines say the government's latest travel restrictions are disproportionate. A report in The Telegraph says 8 companies, including Ryanair and British Airways, have accused Boris Johnson of breaking his promises to fix the expensive cost of PCR tests. Tougher rules introduced due to the Omicron variant mean travellers entering the UK must have evidence of a pre-negative departure test. The US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid will be provided to 8 counties in the state, 8 counties, in the state to provide temporary housing and home repairs. The state governor says he fears more than 70 people are dead in Kentucky alone, and the death toll could be more than 100. In Formula One, Red Bull says it will fight any further appeals by Mercedes against world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. You're up to date. I'll have more for you at 10 o'clock.
Well, good morning. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christies. And we've got another show full of today's big stories and lots of discussion and opinion on the issues you're talking about. So here's what's coming up.
Yes, well, the Prime Minister addressed the nation last night, didn't he? Declaring an Omicron emergency after the UK's COVID alert level was raised. He warned that 2 doses of the vaccine are simply not enough to combat Omicron and has opened booster jabs to all eligible adults from this week in England. We'll be discussing this latest move and the government's COVID battle.
Yes, and MPs are set to vote tomorrow on bringing the new COVID measures announced last week into law. However, the Prime Minister could face the biggest rebellion of his premiership so far, as it's estimated that over 60 of his own MPs could oppose the measures. We'll be talking to Tory MP Andrew Bridgen, who will be voting against the government.
Yes, lots going on there, isn't there? Also on the show, the case against socialite and suspected child trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell has been rested by the US prosecutors, and now the defence will be making its case over the next week. We'll be bringing you up to speed on the case against Maxwell so far and what we can expect from the rest of proceedings.
Yes, we've got all of that coming up and much more as well across the programme, including damning new figures on child abuse deaths during lockdown and police chiefs' plans to declare institutional racism in the force. Get in touch with your views, as usual, on GBViews at gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on Boris Johnson's statement last night.
I couldn't believe what I saw last night, and I still can't. The definition of insanity is extreme foolishness or irrationality. We have a new variant in this country. In fact, by the end of last week, it had been detected in 38 countries. One would imagine it's probably in many more than that by now. Yet, to date, there have been 0 deaths. I don't know about you, but Boris Johnson's address last night felt more like an advert for Big Pharma than something that actually made tangible sense. Just take a look at this clip.
It is now clear that 2 doses of vaccine are simply not enough. A booster dose, boosted, emergency booster, to get boosted now. A booster, boosters. A booster, let's get boosted now. Get boosted now, get boosted now, get boosted now, get boosted now, get.
Does he want us to get boosted? Anyway, and then Boris, of course, had this to say as well.
Do not make the mistake of thinking Omicron can't hurt you, can't make you and your loved ones seriously ill. We've already seen hospitalizations doubling in a week in South Africa, and we have patients with Omicron in hospital here in the UK right now.
I think it's just worth noting that we're not South Africa. In South Africa, just 25% of their population is fully vaccinated. It's also worth noting that, as yet, nobody has died from Omicron in South Africa, and all of the medical reports coming out of that country so far suggest that Omicron is mild. Boris posed himself a question, which he then didn't answer, and that was really the point for me when I lost total faith in what he was saying. He said, some people are asking whether Omicron is more severe than other variants and whether we really need to go out and get this booster jab. He then didn't say that Omicron is more severe than other variants. Instead, he said, we have people in the UK in hospital with Omicron. Yes, 10 of them, apparently. Why didn't he give the exact number? Because it may seem like if only 10 people are in hospital with a particular illness, it's not really that much of a big deal. Now, as a result of Omicron, Boris is going to cancel some medical appointments to help with the vaccine booster rollout. Hospitals are apparently going to be told to clinically prioritise their services to maximise capacity. We're already set to have around 12 million people on an NHS waiting list by 2025. We already have 740,000 people who weren't referred for a cancer diagnosis. I find it very difficult to make the case that someone who might have cancer, or indeed, frankly, anyone with a kind of uncomfortable condition, should not get care so that 18-year-olds can get vaccinated against an illness that probably will barely affect them, and a new strain of which hasn't actually killed anyone anywhere in the world to date. Boris Johnson is saying that we must all get this booster to protect our freedoms and our way of life. Yet he enacts policies that drastically alter our way of life and curtail our freedoms. Working from home, restricting economic growth, burning our health system to the ground. But it's more than just that, isn't it? It's more than that. We're seeing a lot of people reveal a very ugly side to themselves at the moment. I am absolutely not anti-vax at all. I'm very grateful that these things exist. I am pro-human rights and I am pro-common sense. There will be people who will watch a clip of this video today and tweet me afterwards, swearing at me, calling me every name under the sun, saying that I, quote, disgust them. I have never, ever told anyone that I don't think they should get the jab. And neither have I told anyone that I think that they should. It's none of my business whatsoever. I find it hard to justify, however, the priority of the booster programme at the expense of anything else. And the psychological damage that statements like Boris Johnson made last night can actually inflict on the nation. At no point last night did Boris even attempt to hit us with some medical fact or scientific data. Why not? I'm extremely concerned that this is our lives now. It'll be our lives forever. Not being able to get your cancer checked because the hospital is prioritising the 27th booster jab. A new variant emerges every 6 months that scares the living heck out of us. I find it incredible how many people who absolutely never trust Boris on anything, who hate him, who think he's irresponsible and an unfit Prime Minister, are willing to simply swallow absolutely, wholeheartedly what he's saying about Omicron and the decisions that he's making right now. Yes, well, look, I must say I was very, very, very surprised by what I saw last night. I didn't think I would particularly see anything like that in this country, to be honest with you. I don't think he really bothered to make any kind of medical case, which I thought was a shame, because I'm sure that he can. He just didn't.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, there were no new restrictions as such announced, which is obviously very welcome. I think, you know, the Prime Minister was always going to, not always, but the booster jab rollout was set to sort of from January onwards, they brought that forward, to open up to all 18-year-olds, all eligible adults. So that was going to happen anyway. So I don't think he necessarily announced anything new. He's just announced that we're going to focus on boosters, and he's bringing that deadline forward a month. I don't think there's necessarily been any substantive shift in, you know, forcing people to get vaccinations or anything like that, which, let's be honest, we did think would be completely impossible, but we're seeing Western nations doing that now, so that might be somewhere down the line as well. I think that, look, they don't know much about Omicron right now. Everything that we do know seems to suggest that it's a milder variant of coronavirus, which of course is a good thing. It's obviously more infectious. So the government would be criticised, I think, for doing very little, and it will be criticised for doing very much. So it's a delicate balance to strike, but ultimately, I'm against vaccine passports. I'm generally against bringing in any further restrictions. I don't think what we know about Omicron so far justifies those restrictions, but I understand that the government still have to take the fact we don't know enough yet. Just yet, we don't know enough about what it's going to lead to a few weeks down the line.
Yeah, I think you know, I think that's a potential, but I do think that if you are, in my opinion anyway, going to make any kind of impact on our health service whatsoever, any single person who may now not be able to get care, any single person who might have their treatment delayed as a result of what we're currently experiencing with this particular variant, I just find that very, very hard to justify. And it's the psychology of it as well. I know a lot of people were watching what Boris Johnson said last night, you know, a tidal wave of Omicron. It's the language, isn't it? It's the rhetoric. I would have liked it if he'd sat there and maybe given us some data or given us some scientific facts. And I know that we are still learning about it. Yes, fair enough. But there must be something, surely. There must be something that to be able to justify to the nation why we need to be more terrified of this than any other variant. And he didn't even bother with that. So I find that confusing. But let us know what you think. Obviously, hey, maybe you think I'm a dangerous lunatic, and it wouldn't be the only time that I've ever been called that. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Make sure that you get in touch with us.
Yes, but after the break, we'll continue our chats about Boris's booster drive, and we'll bring you up to date with what the Prime Minister said in a pre-recorded statement from Downing Street last night. And we'll be talking to somebody who was not very happy at Patrick, basically calling Boris a spokesperson for Big Pharma, and they'll be going head-to-head to have it out with each other.
Civilised chat.
A civilised conversation, more civilised than what perhaps was had on Twitter, but that's all coming up after the break.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has declared an Omicron emergency just hours after the UK's COVID alert level was raised to 4. In an address last night, he said it was clear that 2 doses of the vaccine are simply not enough to combat the Omicron variant, and urged all adults to get a 3rd dose.
Yes, indeed. Well, booster jabs will be offered to everyone over 18 in England from this week. So the target is to have everyone who wants an extra vaccination jabbed by the new year.
Yes, well, let's talk to John Gaunt, a regular here on GB News. John is a radio host, podcaster and columnist as well. Now, yesterday on Twitter, John told Patrick that he disgusted him after his reaction to the Prime Minister's statement last night, and he tweeted this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what Patrick tweeted. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just watched an advert for Big Pharma. And John, as you can see there, replied, "You disgust me, mate." Smug self-satisfied attitude. And John has been very kind to actually join us on the show today and have a civil conversation about why they disagree. So welcome to the show, John.
Yes, John, I must say I was not aware that they were going to be bringing the tweets up, but it's all out there anyway. Look, okay.
Patrick was absolute. Let me have a say, Patrick, and then you can come at me. I was disgusted by it last night. Straight after the Prime Minister spoke, you were straight in with the Big Pharma line. Now, I don't like Big Pharma either, but in this particular case, the country is under attack. You should not be making some snide, snotty, little, youthful remark like that, in my opinion. And we live in free speech world, don't we?
Well, we live in free speech world, and that's absolutely fine. But it's a strange use of language, isn't it? Really, so if you now kind of representative of a very nasty element of British society at the moment, John.
If you want to see a really nasty element of British society, have a look at my Twitter feed and what some of your viewers are saying to me. It starts with the "see you next Tuesday" term, but then goes on to call me Stalinist, a fascist, a communist, Adolf Hitler, memes of me altered to look like Adolf Hitler, which is some going. So, you know, Patrick, don't try and pull me up on the language. You're the one who said that this was an advert for Big Pharma. It clearly wasn't. You were factually incorrect, and he's the Prime Minister, and he was trying to G up the nation. But I'm quite willing to have a proper debate about what he said, rather than the language I used or you used.
How was he trying to G up the nation? At no point did he present us with any kind of scientific data or any kind of facts whatsoever.
It makes no difference. It makes no difference if he produces scientific facts at Sunday evening at 8 o'clock. You would still deride him. You would still have a go at him. What he was trying to say... Well,
I've been a big supporter of Boris Johnson on numerous occasions, right? I just wonder now, for someone, I would imagine, John, that you don't particularly trust Boris Johnson on a lot of stuff. If he told you it was raining, I imagine you'd go out and check, right? So why do you blindly go and trust him when it comes to this kind of stuff?
All right, OK. See, you're using terms again like blindly. Let me just put you right on that. I was the first person to criticise Boris 2 years ago when I said he should have cancelled Cheltenham and he should have locked down earlier and the big match, the Liverpool match, shouldn't have happened. I got people, the very same people now who are slagging me off, calling me, again, a communist or calling me a traitor to the country. However, it has to be said,
never would do.
He's made loads of mistakes, his PR is dreadful, and he keeps shooting himself in the foot. But the rollout of the vaccines has been great. Now, I don't know about you, Patrick, or you, Mercy, but I believe in the vaccines. Yes, we now know they don't stop transmission. But the facts are, if we all get boosted, the amount of transmission will naturally, logically go down. And that's why I think it's time to say Boris has done a lot of things that I don't agree with. I mean, the party thing, I was criticising that last weekend, although it's a minor irritation. But actually with this vaccine boost, I can see the logic. If everybody works at it hard, we can maybe do this by the end of December. I doubt it myself. Routine operations and some appointments will be cancelled. That is dreadful. Of course it's dreadful. But if we get more people vaxxed, and I think this is what he was trying to say in his own bumbling way, then hopefully it goes down, the transmission. And by going down, less strain, then we can get on with dealing with these other things. I saw Anne Widdecombe just 20 minutes earlier on GB News. She made a similar point, which is the operations and appointments were beginning to happen again. Yeah? And I don't know if you accept that point.
Yeah.
It was beginning. Why? Because the vaccine's working.
Yeah, look,
so therefore,
absolutely.
The logic extended is the more...
I'm not disputing that.
The more
we've been waffling on for a very long time, actually, John. So here's my show at the end of the day, mate. So I will crack on, right? At the end of the day, right now, where we are with this is the fact that we are now having to maybe reduce the amount of appointments that we can see. We've got 740,000 people, John, who have potentially missed out on a cancer diagnosis. Potentially 12 million people on an NHS waiting list by 2025. That means that 1 in 5 people, right, could potentially in England be on an NHS waiting list. Why is their health less important than an 18-year-old getting a booster jab?
OK, it's not. You can't make value judgments like that. The idea of a vaccination programme... you asked me a question. The idea of a vaccination programme is that there'll be less people eventually to be treated for COVID or taking up the beds. You cannot deny that it's a small number, I accept, and no deaths so far, but you cannot deny that they're now ending up in hospital. A small number, as I say. We need to get vaccinated. And let me tell you something, Patrick and Mercy. If more people had actually taken up the vaccine, right, and not been so cynical about it and not spreading fake news about it, we might not be quite in this position. Those people need to take a long, hard look. I cannot for the life of me understand why why people don't want the vaccine. It's free at the point of delivery. And also, of course, there are some side effects for some people. But millions have been vaccinated. and we're all safer because of it. I'm sure you believe in the vaccine, don't you?
John,
do you believe in the vaccine?
John, I think it is hard to deny that on an individual level. Of course, the vaccine does reduce the severity of the disease. You know, I'm young and healthy. I'm double jabbed. I'm reluctantly double jabbed, but I'm still double jabbed. But let me ask you this question, because the problem many people have is that the measures that have been brought in by the government are not justified given what we know about the severity of the Omicron variant so far. They're saying, hang on a minute, all we know so far is that it's pretty mild. Why are we panicking? Why are we bringing in vaccine passports? That's a problem many people have.
Yes, Mercy, but again, your language, why are we panicking? If you were the Prime Minister this morning, you woke up and you cleaned your teeth and you actually had that startling revelation as you looked in the mirror, oh, God, I'm the Prime Minister, what decision would you make? It's okay to say it's mild. The numbers are doubling, trebling every other day. He's made a decision to be cautious till he knows more. It would appear that what you're suggesting, and please tell me if I'm wrong, and what Patrick was suggesting last night, you should take the other approach and just let's wait and see. I don't think you can do that with a pandemic.
I'm just putting to you what lots of people are saying. I'm just putting to you what lots of people are saying to try and sort of, you know, explain to you why the people who you're saying you don't understand why they don't want to get jabbed. That's some of the concerns. These are some of the concerns people do have.
But they are a minority. The majority of people in this country are double jabbed and are taking up boosters. The majority of people in poll after poll believe in social distancing and wearing masks. I know Patrick's not very keen on that, but that's the facts. It's the facts. You can do another poll on GB News now. You'll get a different result. Why? Because you're attracting some of those people. But it is a fact. YouGov, Ipsos, they all say this. And do you know what? To make it even worse for you, Pat, and you, Mercy, they also want even tougher restrictions. I just want us all now to pull together and beat this. And I think eventually we can. It takes time, but it takes collective effort.
All right, John, I appreciate you coming on. I know we had a bit of back and forth there, but frankly, that's the kind of world that we want to live in, right? So thank you very much, John, for coming on there, broadcaster John Gaunt. And hey, you know, it is good to have a bit of back and forth and stuff like that.
Yes, indeed. Well, keep all your thoughts coming into us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those very shortly, and we'll be back as well with more of today's news. See you after the break.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking mild but cloudy in the south. However, in the north, brighter with showers. Let's take a look at some of the details. Southwest England will be rather cloudy as we head towards lunchtime with some patchy drizzle over the hills. It will be very mild though, with temperatures in the low teens. Moving further eastwards, south towards southeast England and East Anglia, we're likely to see a few breaks in the clouds, allowing some sunny interludes to develop. Wales, however, will have a rather wet day with the rain turning heavy and persistent at times, especially across the northwest of the country. The wet weather will also affect northern parts of the Midlands, but further south it will be drier with perhaps a few breaks developing during the afternoon. Feeling mild here with temperatures reaching 13 degrees Celsius. Northern England will start the day largely dry and bright, but the band of rain will gradually spread northwards during the day, although the far north may stay dry until after dark. Moving on to Scotland, they'll see a day of sunny spells and blustery showers. However, after a very windy start in the north, winds will gradually ease as the day goes on. And in Northern Ireland, it's here where we see the best of the sunshine today, with just the odd shower possible. Temperatures here will reach 8 degrees Celsius. It will remain largely dry across the south as we head towards dusk, with a band of rain only slowly moving north. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everyone. You are watching To The Point right here on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Maroki as well. We're here all the way through until midday with a show stacked full, of course, of all of those top topics for you to get stuck into.
Yes, and make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. They've been coming in thick and fast. GB views at gbnews.uk. We'll get to those very shortly, but first, let's give you the latest news.
I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 10 o'clock. The Prime Minister says it will take an extraordinary effort to get all adults vaccinated by the end of the year. Last night, Boris Johnson said the UK was facing a tidal wave of the new Omicron variant. And this morning, the Health Secretary confirmed that around 10 people in England are in hospital with the new strain. Well, plans to offer all over 18-year-olds a booster jab have been brought forward from the end of January to the end of this year. That's a target of 1 million jabs a day.
We're a great country. We have the vaccines to protect our people. So let's do it. Let's get boosted now. Get boosted now for yourself, for your friends and your family. Get boosted now to protect jobs and livelihoods across this country. Get boosted now to protect our NHS, our freedoms and our way of life.
The Prime Minister did warn the rollout acceleration could be at the cost of other medical appointments. Virologist at the University of Warwick, Professor Lawrence Young, told GB News that vaccinations will have a serious effect on people waiting for other treatments.
It's a real dilemma. It really is. And so I think we just have to be really concerned that what's going to happen over the next few weeks in this massive drive is going to mean we take our eye off the ball, and that backlog that was just starting to get to grips with that backlog or in GP practices and in hospitals is going to be further delayed, and that will have significant implications.
People in England are being encouraged to work from home today if they can. It's part of the government's Plan B guidance, which has now come into effect in England. It also includes the reintroduction of masks in public places and vaccine passports for nightclubs and larger venues. England now joins Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, who already have those restrictions. The leaders of some of the UK's major airlines say the government's latest travel restrictions are disproportionate. The Telegraph newspaper reports that 8 companies, including Ryanair and British Airways, have accused Boris Johnson of breaking his promise to fix the expensive cost of PCR tests. Tougher rules introduced due to the Omicron variant mean travellers entering the UK must now have evidence of a negative pre-departure COVID test, and on arrival to the UK, all visitors must now self-isolate until they receive a negative PCR result. In other news, the US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid would be provided to 8 counties in the state to provide temporary housing and home repairs. The state governor says he fears more than 100 people may have died in Kentucky alone. The disaster has impacted more than 5 states across the country. More than 500,000 learner drivers in the UK are waiting to take their test because of a backlog caused by coronavirus lockdowns. The figures come from the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. The AA driving school has warned the backlog is too long and a clear plan is needed. Tests were halted during the pandemic, with many facing significant delays to book a test. Motoring journalist Quentin Wilson told GB News the industry had been neglected for too long.
And it's like the HGV crisis. It's an industry we have not supported or cherished enough. So I'd be saying that we really do need to have a push to get more people in this industry so we've got more people able to test these kids.
In Formula One, Red Bull says it will fight any further appeals by Mercedes against world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. The result secured the Dutchman's first world championship. Formula One broadcaster Rosanna Tennant told GB News it was a bizarre finale.
Pretty controversial from the race director, the way they went about it. First of all, saying that the lapped cars didn't need to overtake the safety car, and then 4 minutes later, changing their mind and saying, yes, those cars were going to pass the safety car. And then, of course, all of the protests that followed the race. Interesting scenes to end a ridiculous season, really.
You are right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. For now, back to the point.
Yes, good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with Mercy Muroki and me, Patrick Christys, as well. Now, we've got a show full of all of the biggest topics, the biggest stories and the issues that you really care about, as always. Here's what's coming up.
Yes, the Prime Minister has announced a renewed booster drive with a goal set at 1 million jabs a day. Quite ambitious. Boris Johnson has called in the army to assist the efforts. This comes after yesterday's national address by the Prime Minister, where he warned of a tidal wave of the Omicron variant. He says we face an emergency within the NHS, with the NHS on its knees. We'll bring you the latest on that.
We will indeed. Now, meanwhile, dozens of Tory MPs are set to rebel against the Prime Minister tomorrow during an official vote on the COVID restrictions announced last week. So this could be the biggest rebellion the Prime Minister has yet faced. And we'll be talking to one of those Tory rebels very shortly.
Yes, and across the Atlantic, the prosecution in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell has rested after 10 days of proceedings. Now it's time for the defence to make its case, which it's expected to do during the week. So what's happened so far? Well, we'll bring you right up to speed.
Yes, well, we have all of that coming up and much, much more across the programme. And you can get in touch with your views, as actually loads of you already have. So thank you very much, everyone. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We'll go to those shortly. But first, Mercy gives her views on the deaths of children during lockdown.
It emerged yesterday that the brutal murder of Arthur Labinjo Hughes was just one of 223 child deaths reported by social services as serious incidents linked to abuse or neglect between April 2020 and March 2021. Labinjo Hughes endured a campaign of torture and starvation by his monster dad and stepmom during the first few months of lockdown while schools were shut, and have now been locked up for their crimes. This death rate of abused children is a near 20% increase on the year before. There's also been a sharp rise in overall serious incidents involving children, as reported by local authorities. Again, a near 20% increase on the year before the pandemic. In the first half of 2020 alone, in fact, the number of serious incidents more than doubled on the same period before the year before. Coincidence? I think not. The reality is that last school bell in March last year was not music to the ears of thousands of vulnerable children. In fact, it was a death knell for the most at-risk children who were forgotten by a government that put COVID models over kids. And that's not just my view. Professor Lucy Easthope is the country's leading expert on recovering from disaster. At the beginning of the pandemic, she was tasked with advising the government on how to plan for the crisis. But despite pandemic planning being what she calls her bread and butter, she says her plans weren't followed. She says this about school closures: "We told the government children would die, and we were completely ignored." Children's Commissioner Rachel de Souza and her predecessor warned the same thing. Amanda Spielman, head of Ofsted, has only a few days ago reiterated that by closing schools, we make the minority of children less safe. We've been told throughout this pandemic that we're keeping the public safe and protecting the vulnerable. What about vulnerable children? And what's the Department of Education's response to these figures? Well, they said, and I quote, "Any increase in serious incidents is of concern, and we have clear processes to report and review them." Of concern? The rise in cases of torture and abuse of children isn't of concern to me. It horrifies me. It makes me sick to my stomach. Nadeem Zahawi, the Education Secretary, has refused to rule out school closures next term. We know from data from the Centre for Social Justice that last time schools were closed, 100,000 children failed to return to schools, the lost children of lockdown. We can't lock up children with their abusers. We can't stop teachers from carrying out their duty of care. Mass school closures cannot happen again for the sake of COVID. It's simply not worth it. More children will suffer and more children will die.
Yeah, absolutely. Another knock-on effect, isn't it, of this pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the idea that because when we were vaccinating children, or when we suggest that we should vaccinate children and we should lock down schools, it's not for the protection of children in any way, shape or form. It has explicitly been to protect other people. And, you know, the logical conclusion of that is that we're allowing innocent children to be harmed by their parents and carers at home for the sake of protecting other people. Now, I don't want an innocent child harmed or killed in some cases. 20% increase in deaths, not a coincidence at all. For the sake of protecting me or anybody else. Does anybody think that's a price worth paying? I don't think it is at all. And the reality is that schools are an incredibly important sort of environment where teachers can, spot when children start acting differently, when they have bruises or things like that. They act as a really important portal for teachers to spot these sorts of things. And the fact that schools were closed for months, and Arthur bin Johu's death has already been linked to lockdown, I just don't think we can afford for that to happen again. So when I see the Education Secretary refusing to rule that out when we're in such a better position than we were a year ago, I just think it's very irresponsible.
I agree, and I think it's yet another unintended consequence, isn't it? So if you've got things like hospital appointments being delayed, people maybe not necessarily going to be able to get, or have not been in the past anyway, able to get like face-to-face therapy, for example, and that has had a massive impact on people. Obviously, it has. Then you've got, of course, what's happening with the economy. Then you've got potential uncertainty over jobs, and then you've got, children potentially struggling with their mental health at school, then potentially being abused as well. And you start to add it all up, and you're like, there's a lot happening.
Yeah, and I don't think it's worth it personally. I mean, that's my opinion. I think we have a vaccine rollout, and that's excellent, but I don't think we should be countenancing any sorts of lockdowns, future lockdowns at all.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, we will be continuing this discussion at about 10:25, but for now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has declared an Omicron emergency just hours after the UK's COVID alert level was raised to 4. So in an address last night, which I'm sure you all watched, he said it's clear that 2 doses of the vaccine are simply not enough to combat the Omicron variant, and urged all adults to get a 3rd dose.
We're a great country. We have the vaccines to protect our people. So let's do it. Let's get boosted now. Get boosted now for yourself, for your friends and your family. Get boosted now to protect jobs and livelihoods across this country. Get boosted now to protect our NHS, our freedoms and our way of life.
Very clear message. Get boosted now from the Prime Minister. Booster jabs will now be offered to everyone over 18 in England from this week, and the target is to have everyone who wants an extra vaccination jabbed by the new year. While GB News' East of England reporter Amelia Harper joins us now from Hertfordshire at one of the mass vaccination centres delivering these booster jabs. Amelia, talk us through what was announced last night and what this means for the booster campaign. Amelia, I'm just going to have to stop you for a second there. We have some issues with your audio. We're going to try and get that resolved and come right back to you. We'll get back to Amelia there. In the meantime, let's go to a few of your views. They have been coming in very thick and fast, particularly after Patrick and John. What's John's surname? I forget.
Gaunt.
John Gaunt.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, they had a civil heated debate earlier on. They disagree to some extent about the need for boosters and further restrictions, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Mark has been in touch, actually. Mark got in touch just to say that it's interesting that the government is saying things about the number of people in hospital with Omicron, not because of Omicron, which is an interesting point, I suppose, as well. You know, just maybe where did they even pick it up in the first place? I agree with you on the vaccines issue, Patrick. And yeah, a lot of people actually seem to be. There are a couple of John Gaunt fans out there, though. To be fair, some of them seem to be saying that they do believe he's taking a more responsible approach. But that's why we have discussions like that, isn't it?
Yes,
bit of back and forth.
Yes, indeed. And moving on, while still on the same issue, still on COVID, it never goes away. Prime Minister Boris Johnson could face the biggest rebellion from his MPs yet during tomorrow's vote to pass new COVID measures into law this week. The BBC estimates that around 60 Tory MPs will oppose the measures, which will necessitate proof of vaccination for entry to large venues.
Yes, indeed. Now, the government sources told the BBC the introduction of Plan B measures for England will be divided into 3 separate votes on Tuesday. So Plan B is expected to become law as Labour is backing the government yet again. Anyway, Andrew Bridgen is the Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire and will be voting against the government on further restrictions. And he's ringing right now, actually. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew. Great to have you on the show. So, how many people do you really think are going to be with you in the no lobby, as it were, then?
I think Mercy just updated you on a number about 60. Well, I think it's now 71.
Right.
And, of course, that doesn't include members of the payroll vote, so PPSs and junior ministers who perhaps might be willing to resign over this. So they would never put their name to that list. So I'm hoping it's going to be more than that. And so it should be, because the science I'm seeing coming out of South Africa about the Omicron variant just doesn't support these lockdown measures. Yes, it's more contagious, but it is extremely mild. And we found, was it last night, that Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, has himself been infected with Omicron. He's not in the first bloom of life. He's an older gentleman. And, of course, the symptoms are mild.
What does it say about the state of Boris Johnson's government that he's actually going to have to rely, perhaps, on the opposition, if enough Tory rebels come forward, to pass, government legislation put down by Boris Johnson and his own government? That's not a good look, is it?
Well, Mercy, what does it say about Her Majesty's loyal opposition? They've consistently voted for stronger lockdown, longer lockdown measures all the way through this pandemic. If you remember back to last summer when we were arguing about opening up earlier, Labour didn't want to open up at all. If they were in government now, we'd never be out of lockdown.
Yeah, well, that's true, actually. Is this the end of Boris Johnson, do you think?
There's been some challenges for the Prime Minister. I don't agree with these lockdown measures. To be perfectly honest, I think that Omicron is being built up as a straw man for the Prime Minister to knock down for political purposes.
Do you think? And why would he want to do that, then?
I think it's moved the agenda on from issues he didn't want to talk about to issues that he does, and it's an exertion of his leadership.
And do you think that Boris Johnson is the kind of man that would impose restrictions on an entire nation, potentially deliberately mislead an entire nation, just so that headlines that he didn't like about himself were kept out of the press?
What I'm saying is that I don't see the science that would support these restrictions, and therefore I'm going to be voting against them. If the government can come out on tomorrow and say, well, Andrew, here's the data, it is not only more transmissible, it's also far more contagious, and it's a serious threat, then I would be there to be convinced. But I don't think they can bring that data forward. I don't think it exists.
You're right there, I would say, but there are people saying that actually it's right to be preemptive, even though we might not have the data now. It's sensible to be preemptive just in case. He's taken a just-in-case approach. What do you say to that?
Well, if we look at the normal evolution of a virus will be, over a period of time, it will become more contagious, which is helpful for the virus, and less pathogenic, less lethal. I think the Omicron variant is a step towards that direction. Why would you want to lock down when no one in South Africa has actually died because of Omicron. There's no figures that support that. 75% of the people in South Africa in hospital with Omicron actually presented for other reasons, such as heart attacks, cancer, strokes, etc. 90% of the people with Omicron in their hospitals are not on oxygen. They're saying that on the previous Delta wave, it was 100% of the patients were in oxygenation. This is a huge difference in the risk profile from this variant.
Yeah. So what do you make of the Prime Minister's sort of moving forward of that booster programme and opening it up to all over 80, eligible over 18s who I believe have had their jabs, second jab, at least 3 months ago? Because lots of people don't want to face the future of repetitive jabs, you know, in perpetuity. And many people might have come forward for their first and second, but will now be a bit reluctant to come forward for further vaccinations.
Absolutely. I think the government are right about one thing, that we are going to face a very, very fast-spreading variant. I think it's going to be very mild. Most people are probably only going to suffer a cold for a few days. And all the science I've seen shows me that people who've been infected with COVID, and I've had COVID back in March 20, right at the beginning, the protection afforded from that is 10 to 20 times better than those who are double vaccinated, i.e. a chance of reinfection. So I think, hopefully, when Omicron has been through, the only thing then that can knock Omicron off as the dominant variant will be probably a virus that's even more contagious, but even less pathogenic, because ultimately, common cold is a coronavirus, and what we need is the evolution of COVID-19 to be the same as a common cold, and then it's going to be endemic. We can get on with our lives.
Just very lastly, and quite quickly, because we are a bit short on time now. Some of the noises behind government. Do you think people will resign over this then?
I think some of the PPS is probably on the point of it, yes, and that's
quite significant.
Giving up their hand on the greasy pole is quite something for most politicians to do, isn't it?
Absolutely, Andrew. Thank you very much for coming in, and thank you for your time. Andrew Bridgen there, of course, Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, just reacting really to this news that potentially something like 71, potentially even more Conservative Party MPs could well rebel over Boris Johnson's Plan B COVID rules.
Yes, well, after the break, we'll be discussing the effect of the COVID lockdowns on children. Did my monologue on that not long ago, which includes the 223 who may have died of abuse or neglect. That's according to new figures. But first, the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A three-way split with the weather this Monday. Bright and blustery across the far north. Some rain across parts of northern England and Wales in particular. In the far south it's mild, but it's pretty murky. The three-way split caused by this waving weather front straddling across the UK. This low brought some very strong winds through the night and first thing across the Northern Isles. Easing down a bit but staying blustery here. Showers across the Highlands, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland dry and bright. Then this damp zone covering parts of Yorkshire through to Lancashire and across North and West Wales, staying fairly soggy here. A bit damp and drizzly in the southwest. Much of the south dry but predominantly cloudy. But it is mild here. Temperatures could get into the teens, whereas only single figures further north. Add on that wind and it feels pretty fresh. And the showers continuing to come in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the evening. The rain will trickle south, so turning damp and dank through South Wales and the Midlands for a time overnight. Some mist and fog is possible. Might just about drop down to freezing in one or two places, but certainly most towns and cities just about hovering above freezing and well above freezing in the south, staying very mild. But staying quite murky here, damp and drizzly for southern England, South Wales during Tuesday. Rain and light drizzle on and off throughout. Something a bit brighter for northern England, North Wales compared to today. Further rain coming in across western and northern parts of Scotland. But again, much of Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. Temperatures here again close to average, but again quite mild in the south with temperatures as high as 11 or 12 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, not a great deal of change. We've got a line of rain across the far northwest, some drizzly conditions over hills across western Scotland and North Wales, but otherwise most places dry, and that's how it's looking for much of the rest of this week. High pressure moving in, so most places dry from Tuesday onwards, often cloudy and increasingly could have some problems with fog.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in so far. It's been a bit of an action-packed show, hasn't it, really? You kind of started, obviously, reacting to Boris Johnson's announcement last night, or his address to the nation last night. Potential Conservative Party rebellion, a pretty significant one by the sounds of things, tomorrow. And yeah, so lots of you have been getting in touch with this. Now, yeah, a lot of people saying that they don't quite understand why Boris Johnson decided to make that announcement last night. Look, Lorraine's been in touch just to say, look, you know, there are only 10 people in hospital with COVID. It would be nice to know their ages and any underlying health conditions as well. I think a lot of people can agree with that.
With the Omicron variant. Of
with Omicron. Yeah. Not in the entire country. That would be.
Although I did, I
be
think the Education Secretary, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't even sure how many cases that we don't really know. That's the thing, and that is sort of the point, because we have so little information about how this thing is going to pan out. That's why a lot of people are saying, isn't all this a bit premature? Isn't bringing in these further restrictions premature? And those are not necessarily people who don't agree with the concept of restrictions. They're just saying, hold on, shouldn't we have more information before we make these moves? But other people are saying, you know, this just-in-case approach is right to take at the moment.
Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see. And look, time will tell. I think you know, for me again, it's the idea of now anything else being at the expense of COVID, right? So, you know, if people are going to find it harder to see their doctor, if people are going to find it harder to get treatment, if people are going to find it harder, frankly, to do anything, and I think It just seems at the moment very difficult to justify.
And it is inevitable. There's nobody who can deny that. Now that the booster programme has been ramped up with all over 18s who've had their jab within the last 3 months, their second jab, being offered it from this week in England at least, that will have to take priority, which will mean a lot of NHS time, a lot of doctors' time will inevitably be taken away. And, you know, the government have said that some operations and some appointments will have to be delayed for now. So it's a shame for those people who would have probably already suffered enough waiting for appointments.
I think it's a massive shame indeed. Paul has been in touch to say that he's thinking of leaving the country. So
the solution.
It's an option.
It's an option.
Certainly is. This is, I mean, it's quite a definitive option. But anyway, there we go. But look, we're just going to move away from COVID for a little bit. You'll be pleased to know. And on Friday, the US government rested its case against socialite Ghislaine Maxwell. So the prosecution was expected to take 4 weeks to make its case, but took only 10 days despite calling 24 witnesses.
Yes, on Friday, Annie Farmer, the fourth and final accuser, took to the stand, waiving her right to anonymity. Maxwell faces 6 counts, including sex trafficking of a minor, for allegations of conduct that allegedly occurred between 1994 and 2004. The defence is expected to start its case next Thursday, and attorneys say their case will likely take 2 or 3 days, and they expect to rest on December the 20th.
Indeed. Well, joining us now is Andre Walker, political commentator and New York Observer columnist. Andre, thank you very much for being on the show. So how come it only took the prosecution 10 days and we were expecting 4 weeks, weren't we? I think a lot of people might be concerned about that.
Yeah, it is surprising, although it was a pretty fulsome case they put forward. I think, as you mentioned, there were 4 principal witnesses. Only one of them waived their right to anonymity, Annie Farmer, and effectively the testimony was all pretty much the same thing, that Ghislaine Maxwell was trafficking young people and girls. In the case of Annie Farmer, apparently she said that she'd been invited to an event that she thought was about getting into university and would be with other students, whereas in reality it was just her, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, where Ghislaine Maxwell demonstrated massage techniques and things kind of descended from there. Look, we're now hearing today that there are going to be 35 defence witnesses, so that's a pretty large number. And so they start on Thursday. We will see to what extent this is debunked. But the argument at stake here is very simply this. Nobody is claiming that Ghislaine Maxwell was the principal operator here. Everybody accepts that Jeffrey Epstein was the key culprit of all of these offences. The question is whether she was a bystander or whether she was an enabler. Obviously, Ghislaine Maxwell and their team are pretty bullish, I think, if they're going in with 35 defence witnesses. One would imagine that what they're hoping is to simply avalanche prosecution with just so much information that they effectively pour scorn and damage the testimony of the 4 alleged witnesses, or victims rather.
Now, this trial isn't televised like many of the famous trials in the past, many of the prolific trials, but we are having to rely on transcripts, of course. And based on what you've seen so far about the court proceedings and the prosecution's case, what do you think they've done enough to convince the jury that Ghislaine Maxwell should be found guilty of what she's accused of?
Well, it's an awful thing to say, but most prosecutors in the United States of America have a conviction rate above 99%. The reason for that is that the vast majority of these cases are settled out of court. Effectively, what they will do is the prosecutor will turn around to somebody and say, look, if you get found guilty of this, you'll get 10 years. However, if you plead guilty and don't go to trial, we'll only give you 1 month in prison. And so it's always very telling when somebody is willing to go to court, simply because they're obviously quite strongly believe that they're going to be found not guilty. Alas, in the United States of America, and it's a great country, and I don't want to slag it off, access to justice is, let's just say, more fulsome for the rich than it is for the poor. And I think that Ghislaine Maxwell will be incredibly encouraged by the fact this was a shorter prosecution case than was expected. And obviously, she will have the best lawyers in the world. And, you know, when you're talking about beyond reasonable doubt and all that you have to do is throw mud at the prosecution, then presumably this trial is certainly not over for Ghislaine Maxwell, and she'll be feeling relatively confident.
Andre, thank you very, very much. Andre Walker there, political commentator and New York Observer columnist, just whizzing you through the very latest from the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Well, after the break, we'll be discussing the effect of the COVID lockdowns on children, including the 223 who may have died of abuse or neglect. That's according to a new report. But first, let's have this morning's news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Prime Minister says it will take an extraordinary effort to get all adults vaccinated by the end of the year. Plans to offer all over 18-year-olds a booster jab have been brought forward from the end of January. Last night, Boris Johnson said the UK is facing a tidal wave of the new Omicron variant. People in England are being encouraged to work from home if they can. It's part of the government's Plan B guidance, which comes into effect today. Measures include the reintroduction of masks in public places and vaccine passports for nightclubs and larger venues. England now joins Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, who already have those restrictions. The leaders of major UK airlines say the government's latest travel restrictions are disproportionate. The Telegraph newspaper reports 8 companies, including Ryanair and British Airways, have accused Boris Johnson of breaking his promises to fix the expensive costs of PCR tests. Tougher rules were introduced due to the Omicron variant, meaning travellers entering the UK must now have evidence of a negative pre-departure test. The US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid will be provided to 8 counties in the state to provide temporary housing and home repairs. Well, the governor says he fears more than 70 people are dead in Kentucky alone, and the death toll could be more than 100. In Formula One, Red Bull says it will fight any further appeals by Mercedes against world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. You're up to date. I'll have more for you at 11 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, well, morning everybody. Thank you very much. Everyone who's been tuning in and indeed emailing in as well, and loads of you have been, gbviews@gbnews.uk, so please do keep them coming. Patrick, some people are homeless and unemployed as a result of government restrictions. It beggars belief that they could continue. There's no name on that one, actually, to be fair. Also, a couple of people saying that I should run for leadership, and I think that is a terrifying state, to be fair.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'd vote for you to not be leader.
Would you?
Yeah.
Would you
if
rather?
that was what was on the ballot paper.
Yeah. Why do you think?
I'd vote for Keir Starmer over you, and that's saying something.
Really? But what is it about me?
The chaos that would ensue for me is just not worth the risk.
Yeah, we wouldn't have a massive party and they'd probably all be dead in a week. But anyway, yes, look, loads of you, of course, saying that John Gaunt, who was on before, who was saying that actually, you know, he's been a little bit nasty to me on Twitter, it's fair to say. We got him on when kind of towards the start of the show, really. And I think one of the things, I don't know how you feel at home about this, but another knock-on effect of what we've had during this pandemic has been, I think it's opened up a lot of nastiness, actually, of people being demonised for not getting the vaccine, people being demonised for getting the vaccine, all of it, really.
I think that probably predates the pandemic. It was bubbling under the surface, wasn't it, with the Brexit debate.
Yeah.
That's when I feel like the public discourse became particularly toxic. But I think in respect to COVID and lockdown, why it's getting people so riled up, it's because they feel that the debate is actually related to the fundamental freedoms. It's not just the debate about vaccines or a pandemic. Yeah. It's actually a debate about fundamental freedoms that are very hard fought for and won. And I think that's why some people get so passionate in the debate.
Indeed. Paul's got, you know, straight down the line, really. He says that Boris Johnson is damned if he does, but damned if he doesn't. No matter what he does, he can't win. And that there are quite a few people out there, I think, feel that way, really, that there just isn't really a right thing for Boris Johnson to do at the moment. He couldn't completely ignore Omicron, but at the same time, is there that much evidence to suggest that he should really be doing that much about it? He's going to cop it one way or the other.
Yeah, I think we agree he should be doing something, because it would be irresponsible not to. And that's where I feel maybe he is stuck between a rock and a hard place, because, as you say, the debate's really polarised and there's no pleasing everybody in all of this. So let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll be getting to those very shortly throughout the programme. Now, home COVID testing kits have run out on the government's website. A message on gov.uk says, sorry, there are no more home tests available right now. It comes less than 24 hours after an announcement that daily testing would become mandatory for anyone double jabbed who comes into contact with a COVID-19 case.
Well, more than 500,000 learner drivers as well are waiting to take their test because of this huge backlog that we've got. So for large parts of the pandemic, learners were banned from taking their tests or any kind of driving qualification, actually. Now, the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency is being criticised for not doing more to reduce the long queue at test centres. Well, Will Hollis is our East Midlands reporter and joins us from a test centre in Loughborough, actually, which I did once hear an American pronounce Luga Baruga, and I did quite enjoy that. But anyway, Will, what's going on?
Yeah, I've known quite a few people that call it Loga Broga. It's often Australian people and Kiwis that make that mistake. I know that Kylie Minogue certainly made that mistake before, but it's definitely Loughborough, where I am in the county of Leicestershire, where I've been this morning, back and forth every 10, 20 minutes or so, learner drivers coming in and out of this test centre to take their test. I feel anxious just watching them from the sidelines, and I certainly hope that seeing this camera here, although it's not pointed anywhere near the test centre, which is off to the side, I hope I'm not adding to their nerves today. It's been since April that people were allowed to take their test again, young and old, learners of all ages. During the pandemic, the height of it, 2020 and 2021, in the third lockdown, the winter lockdown, that was so difficult. People have been able to take their tests since April. After that period, they've been able to do so for a few months now. But it doesn't mean it's getting any easier to get a spot to do a test. Some people are having to wait up to around 6 months, 24 weeks. It's 500,000, as you say, just over 500,000 people that are waiting to do that test. It's a big problem, it's a big backlog, and it's very difficult for the government and the DVSA, the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, to do anything about it. They have implemented a whole raft of different measures. Just to give you an idea of a couple of them: weekend and bank holiday testing, as well as trying to recruit more exam examiners, particularly ones that have already retired, maybe in the last few years, similarly to what the NHS did during the height of the pandemic, trying to get as many nurses and doctors back into hospitals. That's what the DVSA is trying to do. The AA, though, the AA driving school, who's obtained this data, the 500,000 delays. There we go, that's an ambulance. We'll just wait for that to go past before I read this statement, or you're never going to hear what I say. So the AA driving school, they're pretty unhappy about this. They've critiqued the DVSA, saying they're not doing quite enough, but they do acknowledge that driving instructors have adapted to make lessons safer when restrictions were lifted, you know, things like masks, regular clean downs of vehicles. But the DVSA, they say, has still not caught up enough to meet demand, and questions need to be asked about what support they can get to ensure we don't end up back in this same situation if new restrictions are introduced. That's the thing that people are really worried about, seeing new restrictions that would come in place if there were another national lockdown. Obviously, that's something that's very much up in the air, even with Plan B restriction, all of that kind of thing. One of the things that is interesting that the DVSA is saying is that they're encouraging learners to only take their test when they're ready. And I don't know about you guys, but I decided to take my test when I was confident that I was going to pass it. I still failed it that first time. It is difficult sometimes when you're in that mindset of my next stage of my future relies on me passing this test. And at the moment, it's only around 49%, just about half, under half of people that pass their test. So it's a half pass, half fail. Just to read a statement of the DVSA, they say that this is the chief executive, Loveday Ryder, who said that we are doing all we can to provide as many tests as possible so we can get our services back to normal. Somebody that we spoke to earlier on the breakfast programme was Quentin Wilson. He's a motoring journalist, and he gave us a little bit more insight into what's going on behind the closed doors of the DVSA.
This is just a byproduct of the pandemic, like so many other industries. And you can complain at the DVSA as much as you like, but the logistic feat of repurposing all those missed lessons and missed tests is quite considerable. So that's why we've got 500,000 kids waiting to take their tests. There are systemic problems in the whole way people are taught to drive, and we have a shortage of driving instructors, we have a shortage of driving examiners as well, and we need to encourage more people into this industry. If you ask the question, who would want to be a driving instructor or a driving examiner, it's like the HGV crisis. It's an industry we have not supported or cherished enough. So I'd be saying that we really do need to have a push to get more people in this industry so we've got more people able to test these kids and examine them properly. And the worst thing we could do would be to make standards easier, because road safety, the foundation of road safety, are those men and women who diligently test and teach these kids and make them into safe drivers. So it's something the government needs to look at. And I worry that the kind of 4 wheels bad, 2 wheels good culture that we've had over the last decade in this country is impinging on people investing and cherishing the whole driving, teaching, learning to drive culture in this country.
Yes, and while I said that there are measures being put in place by the DVSA to make sure that there are extra slots available on bank holidays and at different times in the year at weekends, one of the things that a driving instructor said to me is that the problem is, even if they've got those spaces to do the tests, they don't necessarily have the vehicles. Most people do the test in the vehicle that they learnt in. So if there's a backlog of people wanting to actually train to do their actual classes, it's very hard for instructors to give up their vehicle so that their other students can go and take a test. So it's quite a difficult circle that they're going in, and only really with a lot more cars, a lot more examiners, is this going to be a problem that can be solved, if it even is going to be something that can be solved anytime soon.
Will, thank you very much. Will Hollis there, reporting from outside a test centre as we try to reduce the backlog.
Yeah, a driving test centre, not a COVID one for once.
No, actually, that's true, yes. Well, thank you very much, Will. Really insightful stuff there.
Yeah.
How did your first driving test go?
I was going to ask you the same thing. My first test, I had many. My first test, I was a mess. I was a terrified mess. My legs were shaking. I was sweating. Wow. had heart palpitations and all sorts.
Gosh, it's like me on a Monday morning. But
how did yours go? Go on.
Really well. Yeah,
as in you passed?
No minors.
Really?
Yeah, but I got away with, obviously I got away with quite a lot, actually, because I was speeding at one point, he just didn't seem to notice.
That's not ideal.
There was another one where he said, can you pull over in a safe and convenient place? And I just refused to do so because I didn't think anywhere was that safe and convenient. So in the end...
to be fair, that's not...
Yeah.
You can't
so
for that.
in the end, it was just like, right, just stop the car here now. And I was like, right, fine, OK. And then someone came the wrong way down a one-way street at me, and it was like an absolute chav in a Citroen Saxo, right? Like drum and bass music pounding out, and then the driving instructor was like, OK, you're off test conditions, mount the curb. So I mounted the curb, and he was like, no, pull up next to him. I was like, I don't want to pull up next to him. He was like, pull up next to him. Like, wound down the window. I rocked the seat back, and these two just start screaming at each other about 5 minutes. And I went into the test centre, and he gave me no minors. So I think we can all agree I passed on my own merit.
Well, congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much.
Belated congratulations.
OK, right, well...
Let's get back to the news, maybe?
It's not sincere, but anyway, right, so French fishermen are said to carry out a blockade... sorry.
You might want to stop.
...of crucial ports, sorry. Woo, OK, in a bid to spoil Christmas for millions of Brits, right, so certainly no laughing matter. The planned blockade would disrupt our already weak supply chain in the busy festive season. Now, it's the latest move in a long-running dispute between the UK and France over fishing licences.
Yes, the French say they're entitled to the same pre-Brexit fishing rights in UK waters, and the UK say they don't deserve those rights since we voted to leave the European Union. And previous moves from the French include a threat to cut off power to the UK Channel Islands.
Yes, well, there we are. I mean, it's obviously not going away anytime soon, is it, what's happening in the Channel there, certainly when it comes to our fish. And I think it is, from what I can see anyway, probably the lowest point of Anglo-French relations, I think, for a good number of years.
Yeah, and just to give you some statistics, so the UK so far have granted around almost 1,800 licences to European fishing vessels to trawl its water, and this includes more than 800 French vessels, and this is, of course, under the Brexit trade deal, but the French are saying actually that most of their licence applications have not been granted and that this is wrong, and the UK have obviously said actually they have granted the majority of the licences, and this is where the dispute comes over. So obviously they're using fresh tactics to try and obviously disrupt trade in the run-up to Christmas in the hopes of moving those negotiations on the issue along.
Yes, indeed. Well, lots of you have been getting in touch. Well, we'll go to your views shortly, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But just moving away from that, we've got a few fun things apparently to end there. And what has been quite a heavy start to the show anyway. So Strictly Come Dancing has officially revealed the three celebrities heading into next weekend's big final after saying goodbye to Rhys Stevenson. So Rhys and partner Nancy Zhu departed Strictly in the semi-final after the dreaded dance-off against John Waite and Johan Radibi.
Johannes Radibi.
Is that right?
Yes,
yeah, I've never watched it anyway. That was hailed one of the most amazing dance-offs ever by show judge Craig Revel-Horwood.
Yes, TV presenter AJ Adudu, EastEnders actress Rose Ayling-Ellis, and chef and former Great British Bake Off champion John Waite will compete in this year's final. Now, I have been for several years, a few of the last years, an avid Strictly watcher. And I have to say, I don't know if you guys watched it. If you did, let us know who you think performed best. But Rose Ayling-Ellis, who is off EastEnders, she's deaf. I thought the dance she did on the semi-finals was extraordinary, and she has performed. I think she has to be the winner for me.
Really?
Yeah. I know you've not watched it and can't make any contributions to this conversation.
I'm very happy that Dan Walker's no longer in it.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let us know what you think. Did you watch it? Who do you think should win? GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Do you think I should get into it? I just don't really like...
What's your dancing like? Do you think you could get into ballroom?
I'd probably get thrown out of it pretty quickly, I would imagine. I think I'm all right, obviously, as the nation now knows.
And who's told you that, then?
What?
That you're good at dancing?
Well,
my mother.
My ballet teacher when I was a child.
And have you danced since?
I think you need to be able to never leaves you. You never leave it.
Okay.
It's always in your blood, you know. You've always got it, haven't you? I mean, you've either, when it comes to rhythm, which is the thing I will know all about.
Yeah.
You've either got it or you haven't, and I don't.
Well, you're going to have to, I'm afraid, one day put the evidence up on a.
Yes. I mean, what? You just asked me to dance for you on the show?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, well, potentially.
I want to see the evidence.
I wonder what kind of genre I could go for. I mean, the way I'm looking these days, I could probably do belly dancing quite well, actually. But anyway, right, moving away. A restaurant boss has stopped working with Just Eat delivery service after having to give out one too many bogus refunds, apparently.
Yes, the complaint that broke him was one customer's insistence that the ice cream, the cheesecake and the milkshakes they received were cold, leading to a refund request under the category of food arrived cold. He insists people who abuse the refund system on Just Eat are evil after leaving him and other delivery-reliant takeouts in a really bad position.
So do they have to refund them then? I don't understand, because it just comes out there and just like, no.
I think people are hacking the system. So obviously on Just Eat, which is it's a third-party app, basically, that's linked to other restaurants, I think you can sort of get a refund issued with you from the restaurant if you say, oh, my food arrived cold, and then maybe they don't check. They're not going to ring up the restaurant and say, did this person's food arrive cold? There's no way to prove it. So I think maybe they just give them the refund. But obviously people are, doing it with things like ice cream.
I mean, that's crackers.
I mean, it's hard not to laugh. I know restaurants are taking a hit, but it is kind of clever.
Yeah, it is. It is, actually.
It's also ethically wrong, so don't do it.
No, of course not. No,
we don't advocate that.
No, I've had a few absolute shockers though on things like Just Eat and delivery, and I'm sure everyone has really. Because there's nothing worse, is there, when you wait, let's say, an hour for something, and then one of the key ingredients just doesn't turn up.
The worst for me is when the sauce doesn't turn up.
That's it.
The sauce is always the key. If you get pizza delivered and it does not have garlic sauce, that should be a crime. That should be a criminal offence.
Yeah. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? Because you can't just go, well, you can, I suppose, go to the shop and sort it yourself, but the reason why you're ordering food in is because you didn't want to do that, isn't it? So, yes, anyway, but thank you very much, everyone who has
a few tangents there, but let us know what you think. gbvs@gbnews.uk.
Yes, absolutely. So, yes, right, where to start, really? It's hard to know. It's definitely one of the most emailed into shows. Joan is asking, has anyone asked for the resignation of the Welsh First Minister after he was filmed dancing at a party after lockdown? I think not. Presumably Boris is to blame for that as well. Joan, I think, just raising a point of maybe we treat Boris more harshly than other politicians.
That's true. But to be fair, there have been protests actually in Wales about the restrictions they're bringing in. Rich Taylor has been very vocal, a commentator that comes on our show regularly, very critical of the government, and he has posted lots of footage of protests in Wales against Mark Drakeford. So there has been some.
Yeah, Karen's been in touch. This is addressed to you, this, Mercy. How on earth could you support Keir Starmer over Patrick for Prime Minister? Keir Starmer was and probably is still anti-democratic over Brexit and would have us in never-ending lockdowns. Unbelievable.
Well, the problem is there, Karen,
yes.
Rogers. Sorry. The problem is there, Karen. You don't know Patrick personally. That's all I would say. I spend more than 3 hours a day with the man.
Yes, and she's probably right about that. Anyway, right, keep all your thoughts coming in to us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
And I promise I won't read out your last name next time.
Not again. We're just going to be giving you more top stories, but we'll be back shortly.
It's time to remind ourselves, there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A three-way split with the weather this Monday. Bright and blustery across the far north. Some rain across parts of northern England and Wales in particular. In the far south, it's mild, but it's pretty murky. The three-way split caused by this waving weather front straddling across the UK. This low brought some very strong winds through the night and first thing across the Northern Isles. Easing down a bit but staying blustery here. Showers across the Highlands, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland dry and bright. Then this damp zone covering parts of Yorkshire through to Lancashire and across North and West Wales. Staying fairly soggy here. A bit damp and drizzly in the southwest. Much of the south dry but predominantly cloudy. But it is mild here. Temperatures could get into the teens, whereas only single figures further north. Add on that wind and it feels pretty fresh. And the showers continuing to come in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the evening. The rain will trickle south, so turning damp and dank through South Wales and the Midlands for a time overnight. Some mist and fog is possible, might just about drop down to freezing in one or two places, but certainly most towns and cities just about hovering above freezing and well above freezing in the south, staying very mild. But staying quite murky here, damp and drizzly for southern England, South Wales during Tuesday. Rain and light drizzle on and off throughout. Something a bit brighter for northern England, North Wales compared to today. Further rain coming in across western and northern parts of Scotland. But again, much of Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. Temperatures here again close to average, but again quite mild in the south with temperatures as high as 11 or 12 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, not a great deal of change. We've got a line of rain across the far northwest, some drizzly conditions over hills across western Scotland and North Wales, but otherwise most places dry, and that's how it's looking for much of the rest of this week. High pressure moving in, so most places dry from Tuesday onwards, often cloudy and increasingly could have some problems with fog.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Maroki. It's just gone 11 a.m, which means we've got about an hour with you. Now, all of those biggest stories as well on the issues that you really care about.
Yes, and make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to those throughout the show, but first, it's time for the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 11 o'clock. People trying to order lateral flow tests from the government website are being told there are no more home testing kits available. In addition, the NHS says those experiencing waits online to book an appointment for their booster jab should try again tomorrow, as the website experiences high demand. Last night, Boris Johnson said the UK is facing a tidal wave of the new Omicron variant. And this morning, the Health Secretary confirmed that around 10 people in England are in hospital with the new strain. Plans to offer all over 18-year-olds a booster jab by the end of the year. That's a target of 18 million jabs have been accelerated.
We're a great country. We have the vaccines to protect our people. So let's do it. Let's get boosted now. Get boosted now for yourself, for your friends and your family. Get boosted now to protect jobs and livelihoods across this country. Get boosted now to protect our NHS, our freedoms and our way of life.
The Prime Minister did warn that the rollout acceleration could be at the cost of other medical appointments. Virologist at the University of Warwick, Professor Lawrence Young, told GB News that vaccinations will have a serious impact on people waiting for other treatments.
It's a real dilemma. It really is. And so I think we just have to be really concerned that what's going to happen over the next few weeks in this massive drive is going to mean we take our eye off the ball, and that backlog that was just starting to get to grips with that backlog in GP practices and in hospitals is going to be further delayed, and that will have significant implications.
People in England are being encouraged to work from home today if they can. It's part of the government's Plan B guidance, which has now come into effect in England. It also includes the reintroduction of masks in public places and vaccine passports for nightclubs and larger venues. Well, England now joins Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, who've already had those restrictions in place. Chief Economic Strategist Gerard Lyons told GB News that working from home will hit the economy.
Pandemic's latest variant will probably knock the economy in December, in January, possibly into February as well. So there will be a temporary hit to the economy, but that should not result in permanent changes to policy. So we need to weather the storm and hopefully move as quickly as possible through these restrictions.
The leaders of some of the UK's major airlines say the government's latest travel restrictions are disproportionate. The Telegraph newspaper reports 8 companies, including Ryanair and British Airways, have accused Boris Johnson of breaking his promises to fix the expensive cost of PCR tests. Tougher rules were introduced due to the Omicron variant, meaning travellers entering the UK must have evidence of a negative pre-departure COVID test, and on arrival to the UK, all visitors must now self-isolate until they receive a negative PCR result. In other news, 2 freight ships have collided off the southern coast of Sweden, leading one of the vessels to capsize. At least 2 people have been reported as missing. Media reports that British-registered Scott Carrier and a Danish ship came together. Authorities in Sweden and Denmark say several Coast Guard vessels and helicopters have been sent to the scene. The US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid will be provided to 8 counties in the state to provide temporary housing and also fund home repairs. The state governor says he fears more than 100 people may have died in Kentucky alone. The disaster has impacted more than 5 states across the country. In the UK, more than 500,000 learner drivers are waiting to take their test because of a backlog caused by coronavirus lockdowns. The figures come from the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. The AA driving school has warned the backlog is too long and a clear plan is needed. Tests were halted during the pandemic, with many facing significant delays to book a test. In Formula One, Red Bull says it will fight any further appeal by Mercedes against world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. The result secured the Dutchman's first world championship. You're up to date. I'll have more for you in half an hour. For now, though, back to the point.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Maroki and Patrick Christys, and we've got another hour full of today's big stories and lots of discussion as well on the issues you care about. So here's what's coming up.
Yes, well, the Prime Minister addressed the nation last night, didn't he, declaring an Omicron emergency after the UK's COVID alert level was raised. He warned that 2 doses of the vaccine are simply not enough to combat Omicron and has opened booster jabs to all eligible adults from this week in England. We'll be discussing this latest move in the government's battle against COVID.
Yes, and the G7 summit in Liverpool ended with a united message to Russian President Vladimir Putin in a rare show of solidarity. The message, well, Russia should be no doubt that further military aggression against Ukraine would have massive consequences. We'll be updating you on that very shortly.
Yes, we will indeed. Britain's most senior police chiefs are allegedly considering a public apology on behalf of their institution for endemic racism. We'll be talking about what this means with a former police and crime commissioner in just a few minutes.
Yes, we've got all of that coming up and much more as well over the next hour. And get in touch with your views, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll get to those very shortly. Now, as we've been talking about this morning, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has declared an Omicron emergency just hours after the UK's COVID alert level was raised to 4. In an address last night, he said it was clear that 2 doses of the vaccine are simply not enough to combat the Omicron variant and urged all adults to get a 3rd dose.
Yes, indeed.
We're a great country. We have the vaccines to protect our people. So let's do it. Let's get boosted now. Get boosted now for yourself, for your friends and your family. Get boosted now to protect jobs and livelihoods across this country. Get boosted now to protect our NHS, our freedoms and our way of life.
Yes, lots of stuff about boosting things there, wasn't there? Well, booster jabs will be offered to everyone over 18 in England from this week. So the target is to have everyone who wants an extra vaccination jabbed by the new year.
Yes, while Dr. Bharat Pankhania is a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School and has over 20 years' experience in disease control and management. And he joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. Just give us an overview from your perspective where we are at the moment and whether it is right that the Prime Minister has turbocharged this booster rollout, or we're just panicking at the moment about this Omicron variant.
Hello, good morning. So the big issue is that Omicron, the variant, has arrived in all over the world. And the key point is that the rate of infection with Omicron rising at a much, much steeper rate, much faster than with Delta. In other words, the number of cases
Bharat, it's a shame really because there's a lot of questions on this particular topic at the moment. So if the infection rate is incredibly high, the transmissibility is good, why then have we not seen any recorded deaths so far? Also, how many people are going into hospital as a result of Omicron, or maybe just getting it when they're in there or something like that as well?
Absolutely. Deaths are a lagging indicator, I suppose, and we might have to wait a few weeks to figure out whether there will be any deaths as a result of this, but we obviously don't know how long it's been around anyway, so it's just been identified. But do we have Dr. Bharat back? Yes, we do, I believe. Apologies for that. You were saying this Omicron variant is doubling.
Yes, it is. And what we've got to do is wear our masks and do all...
Oh, well. It's not meant to be, is it, unfortunately, for Dr. Bharat? But hey, you know what? He's on the station pretty regularly, so I'm sure we'll speak to him soon.
Yes, we will put those questions about the booster very shortly to somebody else. And, of course, Patrick's monologue at the top of the 9:30 was talking about, you were quite critical of Boris Johnson, weren't you? And this idea that he's almost neglecting all the effects of what he's bringing in. He seems to be not really caring about everything else that's going on in the country and just focusing on this booster jab despite this Omicron variant, despite little evidence that it's going to do society much more harm than any other variant we've encountered.
Yeah, it is quite a strange situation as far as I'm concerned anyway. I must say I was very surprised at what I saw last night. I was expecting, and indeed I was hoping, some more science, some more data, some more facts, really, on Omicron. And I was very surprised that Boris Johnson didn't appear to make any particular attempts to go and do that, and give that for us. I was also quite surprised at the fact that, very freely saying, now, hang on a minute, what's actually going to happen is that we are going to, at the expense of potential other medical procedures, we're now potentially going to be doing this booster campaign. And for me, it just seemed a bit weird, really. Yeah,
and let's go to... You've been getting in touch with us across the programme on this very issue. So let's go to some of your views as well, because this is an issue a lot of people are quite... Well, I'd assume the majority of people are quite passionate about, because it deals with your freedoms fundamentally, and that's why many people do get heated about this. And also, lots of people have suffered because of the lockdown measures, because the NHS has been so focused on dealing with COVID cases that we know we have the data already, and the data is staggering, and the extent to which focusing on COVID has knocked back all the other stuff that we were supposed to be focusing on, with waiting lists going up massively and people just not getting the level of treatment that they should.
No, exactly. I mean, it's affected absolutely every single element of society, hasn't it? But there's no name on this one. But the TV appearance last night was a very convenient deflection to help cover some of the Prime Minister's current problems. And there was some... You had Andrew Bridgen on before, who's a Conservative rebel MP now. I think you remember he was the first person to write a letter of no confidence in Theresa May. It certainly looks like he's going to be voting against Boris Johnson's COVID Plan B tomorrow. And he was saying that actually, potentially speaking, you know, this was quite a convenient moment for Boris Johnson because there's a lot of personal stuff flying about him at the minute. And, you know, since his message last night, we're not really talking about that, are we?
Yes, indeed. And, you know, the cynical people might, or people, realists maybe, might look at his address yesterday and say, yes, it's a very convenient distraction from all the stuff that's been going on with the Christmas parties and that whole debacle. And people will also say, why was the message pre-recorded? Why didn't he do it live? Was he trying to evade scrutiny? Did he know that if he did hold a press conference, actually, the questions would very quickly turn to not Omicron, but actually, did he know about this Christmas party? Why was he involved in the quiz that is now being criticised for, the Christmas quiz, which seems to have taken place when London was in Tier 2, and you know, it's unclear at the moment, but he's being criticised for a lot, and people are saying, well, he was scared. He was running scared that he will be asked about those other things if he did it live.
Well, potentially. Well, I think he would have been, wouldn't he? Absolutely. Mercy, your comments on what the country would be like if Patrick was Prime Minister sounded more than a little like some people's view of Boris Johnson's running of the country. So potentially...
Is that a compliment or a...
Well, no, I think it's just passing comment on me, really, saying that I think he thinks I'd be quite a Boris about the whole thing. But
given this, the level of criticism he's coming under, I'm not sure that is a compliment.
No, I do quite like a Christmas party, though, to be fair. So, you know, maybe we've got something in common there. Why are many deaths? Why are there, many deaths from other illnesses, but these are less worthy than COVID deaths? And why they're avoiding answering basic questions. That's from Linda. And I think that hints to, Linda, doesn't it, one of the things that we've spoken about a lot on the show so far, which is that the idea of COVID being, you know, guarded against or protected against at the expense of everything else, and whether or not now people have had enough.
And that's including at the expense of children. We gave you some figures earlier that have come out yesterday about the 20% increase in child deaths from suspected abuse and serious cases. 20% up on during the COVID 2020 to 2021. From the previous year, and I was pointing out that's obviously not a coincidence. And this is something lots of people have pointed out, that actually we're sacrificing children just for the sake of COVID and just for the sake of dealing with COVID.
Yeah, indeed. And I am amazed when it comes to things like his announcement last night, for example. How many people who would normally not trust Boris Johnson at all, that very often think that he's not fit to be a leader, very often say that they dislike him and they dislike his politics, are very, very keen to just swallow what he's saying now about Omicron. I find that an odd mix.
Yeah, well, let's get a view about Boris Johnson from somebody very close to him. Prime Minister Boris Johnson could face, as we were saying, the biggest rebellion from his own MPs yet during tomorrow's vote, which will pass new COVID measures into law this week, or will seek to pass those measures. We have got around 71, that's the current estimates at the moment, 71 Tory MPs who are set to actually vote against Boris Johnson. That's the Tory MPs. And, of course, Labour are expected to vote with the government, so they'll be voting to waive the route, so to speak, Plan B measures.
Indeed. Well, Matt Vickers is a Conservative MP for Stockton South, and he said that he will be voting against the government on further restrictions. Thank you very much for joining us. So why are you voting against that?
Good morning. I think, you know what, the decisions around the pandemic, around lockdowns, around all these restrictions are big ones, because every day I hear from constituents who've had businesses go to the wall. I hear about the impact on people's elderly parents who are living alone in fear of this thing. I'll hear from people whose children are having a really tough time as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown and school closures. So every time we make one of these decisions, it's a big deal. But we went out there and we told people about these vaccines that are going to, that are making the difference. And it's right that Boris is throwing everything at getting as many jabs into as many arms as possible. And I'd encourage everybody to go down there and get that booster. But I think in real terms, we have to learn to live with it now. We cannot, because this is not the last variant, is it? There will be another variant. And what are we going to do in 2 months' time when the next variant comes along? We know that this one is transmitting at a hell of a rate, but we also know that I'm sure there's no recorded deaths still. I'm sure that the hospitalizations are very, very low. So I think just in case, if we keep doing things just in case, we've got to bear in mind the impact on our young people. We've got to bear in mind the impact on the economy and all of those other things, because we cannot end up in an ever ongoing cycle of restrictions that flinch every other month.
If 71 at least, those are the estimates of Conservative MPs who are voting against the government on this, don't think Boris Johnson is basically doing the right thing, why should the public think that he's doing the right thing?
Do you know what? Parliament will make a decision tomorrow, and I will abide by the rules that are set down, because that's what we've decided as a collective. And I think, you know what? I imagine Boris is doing the best he can with what he's got. But in real terms, we told people they get the jab and we get on with it. And you've got to learn to live with it. We cannot carry on living like this, because it's a balance of lives and livelihoods, but it's also about quality of life. It's about the elderly person who's been trapped in their house alone for however long. It's about the impact on those young people at school. We've got to make a step forward.
You mentioned there that we have to live with this, and this has been, this has been the view of Sajid Javid himself, the Health and Social Care Secretary. That's what he said. We have to learn to live with it when he took over the job from Matt Hancock. But how does it make you feel then when you hear Boris Johnson saying yesterday in that national address that it's become clear that 2 doses of the vaccine, which we were told was the way out of this pandemic, is actually not the way out?
I think, do you know what? People get a flu jab every year, and maybe if getting a jab every year allows us to keep the economy going, allows us to keep children in schools, allows us to keep businesses open, allows us to see our loved ones, stops people dying alone in hospitals. If that's what it takes, a jab in your arm, then that's what we've done for flu, and that's what we should do for COVID. However, I think the restrictions are a step too far, and then that's my way forwards.
I do wonder whether or not we're heading towards a situation of mandatory vaccinations as well. It does seem to go down this route, doesn't it, where Boris Johnson alludes to something, then a couple of months later it happens. Do you think that Boris will do that?
I'm hopeful it won't happen. I think that, do you know what, one of the great things is this freedom that we all enjoy, the right to have the choice. Would I do everything I could to encourage people to have that jab? Yes, I would. But I think that's a decision they've got to come to on their own. I just don't see mandatory vaccination, taking that choice away from people, as a valid way forwards. There's lots of reasons why people might choose not to. It's our job to convince them to go out and get it done.
Well, Matt Vickers, thank you for joining us this morning to talk about that Conservative MP for Stockton South, and he will be voting against the government tomorrow on bringing in those Plan B restrictions, which were announced, I think, just over a week ago or a week ago. Time morphs into one blob during the
retrospectively
COVID.
Voted on like a normal functioning democracy.
Yes, indeed.
After the break, we'll discuss the latest on the developing situation between Russia and Ukraine after the G7 summit was warned of major consequences if Ukraine is invaded. But first, time for the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A 3-way split with the weather this Monday. Bright and blustery across the far north. Some rain across parts of northern England and Wales in particular. In the far south it's mild, but it's pretty murky. The 3-way split caused by this waving weather front straddling across the UK. This low brought some very strong winds through the night and first thing across the Northern Isles. Easing down a bit but staying blustery here. Showers across the Highlands, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland dry and bright. Then this damp zone covering parts of Yorkshire through to Lancashire and across North and West Wales, staying fairly soggy here. A bit damp and drizzly in the southwest. Much of the south dry but predominantly cloudy. But it is mild here. Temperatures could get into the teens, whereas only single figures further north. Add on that wind and it feels pretty fresh. And the showers continuing to come in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the evening. The rain will trickle south, so turning damp and dank through South Wales and the Midlands for a time overnight. Some mist and fog is possible, might just about drop down to freezing in one or two places, but certainly most towns and cities just about hovering above freezing and well above freezing in the south, staying very mild. But staying quite murky here, damp and drizzly for southern England, South Wales during Tuesday. Rain and light drizzle on and off throughout. Something a bit brighter for northern England, North Wales compared to today. Further rain coming in across western and northern parts of Scotland. But again, much of Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. Temperatures here again close to average, but again quite mild in the south with temperatures as high as 11 or 12 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, not a great deal of change. We've got a line of rain across the far northwest, some drizzly conditions over hills across western Scotland and North Wales, but otherwise most places dry, and that's how it's looking for much of the rest of this week. High pressure moving in, so most places dry from Tuesday onwards, often cloudy and increasingly could have some problems with fog.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Yes, morning everybody. Right now, the G7 summit in Liverpool ended with a united message to Russian President Vladimir Putin in a rare show of solidarity. What was that message? Well, it was that Russia should be in no doubt that further military aggression against Ukraine would have massive consequences. So, strong words, eh?
Yes, but with 175,000 Russian troops already at the Ukrainian border poised to invade, led by a president who insists they're only there for a military exercise, are words enough to stop what could be the biggest outright Russian military attack in decades?
Yeah, well, here to help us answer this question is Marek Matrashek, who's chairman of the CEC Group, an advisory firm based in Central Europe with expertise in defence and security and the energy sector as well. Thank you very, very much. So, do you think then that this will have any impact on Vladimir Putin whatsoever? Will he be scared of the G7? Do you actually think he's going to invade?
I think this is the $64,000 question. There's still a very big debate amongst experts as to whether this is a massive bluff by Putin in order to extract significant concessions from the West, primarily, and we've seen announcements from the Russian foreign ministry and from Putin himself, that what he's looking for essentially is a vassalized or neutralized Ukraine with no further prospect of entry into NATO, no Western arms sales into Ukraine, and also a withdrawal from potentially NATO member states, such as the Baltics and Poland, of military forces that Putin regards as a threat. Now, that's one version. The other version is that this is not a bluff, and actually Putin has essentially made a decision to invade. It's not if, but when, because that would tie in with what he and many feels is his historical mission, which is to reunite the Russian-speaking ethnic minorities beyond the borders of Russia today in the Ukraine and potentially in Belarus and potentially in the Baltics. So this is a very, very dangerous situation. Either option bodes very ill for stability in Europe.
The G7 and Liz Truss, our foreign secretary, has said that they will impose sanctions, economic sanctions on Russia if necessary. But some are saying, that Russia, that's not enough to stop Russia. They're not going to back down just because of some economic sanctions. What would you say to that?
Well, again, we don't know the details of what is being decided essentially between not just with the G7, but within the EU and in discussion with the US government, the US administration. Certainly, the experience hitherto, whether you look at the invasion of Georgia, invasion of Crimea, invasion of Donbass, those are all been aggressive moves by Russia, which have been met by sort of sanctions, but they've never really been enough to cause damage to Putin's interest. And the question is, and we've been assured publicly by the US administration and also the G7 and the EU, that this time those sanctions really will be a fundamental threat to Russian economic interests and may give Putin pause for thought. But we don't know those sanctions. There's been talk of withdrawing Russia from the SWIFT banking system. There's been talk of highly targeted sanctions against crucial business oligarch allies of Putin and other measures, including issues involving foreign currency trading and so on. We don't know the details, but my view is that those sanctions will have to be significantly qualitatively more strong than what we've seen hitherto to actually make Putin change his course.
Yeah, and do you think it is based largely around some kind of notion of destiny for Vladimir Putin, this? Do you think this is like a legacy move more than maybe a practical one for him?
Well, I agree. I mean, a lot of people find it very difficult to believe that our leaders today can be guided by ideology, as we saw before the war in the 1930s. I'm not comparing Putin to Hitler, but certainly the modus operandi of, and the narrative, the ideological narrative of being on a historical mission to reunite Russian speakers, to claim that borders are violable, that territories can be annexed purely on the basis of ethnic inhabitants' identities. This is and pushing forward. This is exactly what we saw in the 1930s. And right now, there's nothing to suggest that Putin is not following that game plan. And the question is, what is the West going to do about it? Will it follow the pre-war strategy towards Germany of appeasement? Or will it actually firm up and actually make it very, very painful for Putin to move forward? We'll see what happens.
Yes, well, indeed, we will see what happens. Thank you, Marek Matrashek, there for joining us on that, chairman of the CEC Group, which is an advisory firm based in Central Europe, which advises on defence and security.
Indeed, yes. Scary times, eh? Scary times. What do you think about that particular issue? Do you think that Putin will go and do it? I don't know what they might actually end up doing. It's all very well and good going economic sanctions, this, that and the other. But if he is just ideologically driven, if he is just driven around the idea of essentially reuniting what he may see as, obviously his country's people, whether that's an ethnic thing or a religious thing or whatever, actually an economic sanction is not going to bother him too much, you would have thought.
Yes, indeed. I don't think the Russian state exactly used the same rule book necessarily as some of the other Western states and the G7 states. But time to go to your views, gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Indeed. Right, so we've got... why are you two both so against Boris? The guy does not have a crystal ball. You are both talking nonsense. Stop it. So that's from Nina. Thank you very much,
Sounds
Nina.
like a bit of a parental telling off there.
Yes. But I don't hate Boris whatsoever. I'm not anti-Boris. I'm anti some of the things that he's done. And I find the current situation quite strange, really.
Yeah.
And I do think regarding the party as well, or alleged party, all right, I don't really care that he had one, but I do care that it was potentially happening at a time when people were being kept away from their loved ones while they died in hospital. I think that's a concern.
Yeah, and I think it would be irresponsible of us to sit here and not hold the man to account who's the Prime Minister, and he, by definition, should be open to scrutiny by, members of the media. So that's exactly what we're doing. It's nothing to do with a personal vendetta against Boris Johnson.
No, but thank you for your views, Nina. Of course, we will take it on the chin. Thank you, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Right, so coming up, we look at whether or not the UK police chiefs will follow through on their alleged plan to publicly admit institutional racism. But before that, we'll have a look at the morning's headlines with Rosie.
I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. People trying to order lateral flow tests from the government websites are being told there are no more home testing kits available. In addition, the NHS says those experiencing waits online to book an appointment for their booster jab should try again tomorrow, as the website is experiencing high demand. Last night, Boris Johnson said the UK is facing a tidal wave of the new Omicron variant, and this morning the Health Secretary confirmed that around 10 people in England are in hospital with the new strain. Thousands of people in England are now working from home as part of the government's Plan B measures, which come into force today. It also includes the reintroduction of masks in public, and from Wednesday, vaccine passports for nightclubs and larger venues will be required. England now joins Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, who already have those restrictions. The US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid will be provided to 8 counties in the state to provide temporary housing and home repairs. Well, the governor says he fears more than 100 people may have died in Kentucky alone. The disaster has impacted more than 5 states across the country. Red Bull says it'll fight any further appeals by Mercedes against Formula One world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. You are right up to date. I'll be back with more on all of today's top stories in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, Britain's most senior police chiefs are allegedly considering a public apology on behalf of their institution. They wish to admit and apologise for institutional racism within the force, according to The Guardian.
Yes, well, discussions began last week where advisers suggested radical reform is needed, with an outcome expected in February 2022. So the police have been criticised in the past for a series of controversial or unequalities, if me to say, stop and search procedures, racial profiling and the use of force. So Boris Johnson has alluded to the force's institutional racism before, saying that plans to reform the police system need to accept institutional racism if it is to be anti-racist.
Yes, well, Paddy Tipping, former Nottinghamshire Police and Crime Commissioner, joins us now to talk about this. Thank you for joining us. Do you think this is the right move on the part of these police chiefs?
Well, the police have moved a lot since the Macpherson report in 1999. George Floyd died 18 months ago. That gave us a push to do even more. I think the police have done a lot, but there's still an awful lot more to do. And owning up to having a problem is the first step in making sure that you can resolve the problem.
And does that entail admitting, do you think there is institutional racism in the police force? I know it's a very broad question, but that would be effectively what they'd be saying if this goes through.
So I think there's racism across society, and I think there's racism, institutional racism within the police force. I think, in fairness, the police are working quite hard to try and tackle it. The number of black and Asian officers are going up. The police are having difficult conversations with BAME communities. I think, as the cops would put it, they're on the case. But if you're saying to me, is there more that needs to be done? Yes, there certainly is. And it needs to be done much more quickly.
OK, all right. I mean, you know, a lot of people might say, well, hang on a minute, the trust in the police force is already a bit squiffy with a lot of people. You know, they've been accused of not treating women particularly well. They've also potentially been letting down a lot of people when it comes to domestic violence. And, of course, there's the race issue like this now. If they admit this, if they come out and say it, do you not think it could actually, in a weird way, undermine trust in the police still more?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is that the BAME communities, and in particular the black community, still have antagonism and concern about the police force. And I think until the police acknowledge that, listen to people, and more importantly, act upon it, then we're not going to make any progress. There's no good having a discussion if you don't listen to the other side of the argument.
And how do you mentioned a bit earlier that you do think there's institutional racism in society broadly, but also in the police in particular. And I just wondered how you, in your opinion, how you feel that institutional racism actually manifests in practice. What are some pieces of sort of evidence that you would point to justify that claim?
Well, I think the really significant thing is in the history of British policing, there's only ever been one black chief constable. If you look at the ranks in the police, the number of people from BAME communities or at the top tier are very low indeed. If you look at the percentage of officers from a BAME background, it's very low. Here in Nottinghamshire, they'll be the first force in the country to have a workforce that reflects the wider community. The number of black officers has doubled. We need to do more, we need to do more quickly, and we need to acknowledge that we've got a problem, but say, hey, we're on it, we accept it, and we're going to do things about it.
Yeah, and one of the things that people who do believe there's institutional racism in the police point to often is stop and search, which the figures do show disproportionately carried out on black and ethnic minority individuals. But other people say, actually, let's also not forget that it's black children in particular, young black people who suffer the most when there are knives out on the street. 24 times more likely to be a victim of homicide if you're a young black person. So what's your position on stop and search? Because if it's institutionally racist, then that means you should stop it. But then by doing so, you're harming more black kids, surely.
So there are a lot of powerful black mums here in Nottingham. And what they say to me is that they don't want their kids stabbed to death on the streets. They want stop and search to be used thoughtfully and wisely, working on intelligence and information. And if you do it properly, then I don't think there's much to complain about. But in the past, as you rightly say, a stop and search has been used as a random tool. It's clearly the case that young people, particularly black young men, have been picked upon disproportionately. And of course, again, it's an area where we've made progress. The disproportionality rate has come down here in Nottinghamshire. It's not the case across the country by any means, but there is more to be done. And one of the things that really worries me is that 18 months ago, George Floyd was stabbed to death. The police at the time said, we're going to do things about it. This is a wake-up call. We're 18 months on, and we've still got to make much more progress.
Well, Paddy Tipping, thank you for joining us to talk about that important issue. Former Nottinghamshire Police and Crime Commissioner, and just a correction, George Floyd wasn't stabbed to death. He was knelt on. He was murdered by a police officer in America. Knelt on, and I think it's interesting the parallels people seek to draw between America and here, because we're in a completely different position, and it's a complete fake parallel to draw, because the crime, especially race-related crime, from the police to individuals, to society, is completely on a different scale in America. We don't see anywhere like the number of deaths in custody, for example, in this country that like we do in America. And of course we don't have guns, so it's very incredibly rare for somebody to actually be shot, let alone be killed in any other way by the police. So I'd be careful in drawing parallels between us and America personally.
We're going to go on to F1 in a second, because obviously it was a rather big day in Formula One, but read out a couple of these views first. This is from Paul, thank you very much. I'm a natural loner, it's my style, I like it that way. I actually class you two as my friends.
I thought that said lover. I thought, oh, well, that's revealing.
No, well, he might be as well. He might be as well.
Wow, that's really lovely.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes, cheers, good stuff. Yes, there are lots of people getting in touch about the police, actually. How can it be anything else? This is about institutional racism, of course. You have to look at, basically people saying that they do think that the police force may well be institutionally racist. I'm very, very divided on that. I can't help but feel as though... I hope it's not. I hope it's not like a kind of just a token gesture, right? Going like, oh, OK, look, we'll hold our hands up and apologise for being institutionally racist and over the course of our history. I hope that they actually really do regard that they are if they're going to do that. It's not just something to say to kind of maybe absolve them of things.
Yeah, I mean, I am quite sceptical, I'll have to say. I have looked for a long time at the data on race and policing, and I'm quite sceptical when people raise particular bits of data as proof of institutional racism. That's the only thing I'd say. I mean, whether, the other problem is institutional racism. It means different things to different people, and so it's very complicated. But as you say, if they're going to do it, let's hope they actually think they are, and they're not just doing it to appease the race lobby, so to speak. Exactly.
We just had something through in my ear there, which apparently Boris Johnson has just announced that one patient has now died after testing positive for Omicron. Obviously, we don't know the exact circumstances of that yet. But Boris Johnson was speaking during a visit to a vaccination clinic, as we understand it, in London, where he revealed this. So it could well be the world's first ever Omicron death.
Yes, and of course we don't know the details of it, so there's always that distinction people make of whether somebody died with Omicron or of Omicron. But of course, when we know more, we'll bring that to you.
Yes, well, there's a bit of a gear change, if you'll excuse the pun. Max Verstappen was eventually able to celebrate his maiden Formula One World Championship after 2 appeals from Mercedes were rejected by the race stewards following the Dutchman's controversial last lap victory at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
Yes, the Red Bull driver stormed past title rival Lewis Hamilton in the closing stages of the season-ending race at the Yas Marina circuit, thanks to a late safety car that put him right behind Hamilton on much fresher, grippier tyres. He was not wearing tyres at the time. Mercedes immediately launched 2 appeals against the result, but saw both dismissed.
It's almost controversial.
Yeah, it is. I mean, congratulations, I suppose, are in order for Max,
but
also
very happy, Max. Yeah.
But also with slight bitterness.
Yeah.
With a tinge of slight bitterness, I suppose. But I have to say, I can't pretend to know anything about this because I've never once in my life watched a Formula One race. I like the idea of fast cars. Would I ever get in one? Or do I find it particularly thrilling to watch them? Probably not.
OK, all right. Well, that's interesting. I don't normally watch it too much, but I think this one was such a particularly exciting climax to a season, wasn't it? That I kind of had to give a little look anyway. But we are joined now by motorsport writer Maurice Hamilton. And before you ask, no, apparently there is no relation between himself and Lewis.
Nope.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that you might be able to just explain some of the controversy for us, really, on why Mercedes' appeals were turned down.
In simple terms, to try and relate it to other sports, the referee made a decision and he got it wrong. But it is the referee's decision at the end of the day, is the way I read it. In other words, the race director, who would be our equivalent of a referee, made this decision about letting lap cars through, about how he restarted the race after the accident with just 1 lap to go. And it was the manner of him doing that that has caused all the problems. And it appears to go against the very detailed rules and regulations in this particular point. And that allowed Max Verstappen to take the lead. It was a race that had really been bought by Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes by quite some way. Red Bull and Verstappen were not going to get close to him, but this changed the whole thing. And in many ways, I suppose, it was a typically dramatic end to a very, very dramatic season.
As I was just saying there before we introduced you, I've never watched Formula One, I do have to admit. It just, to me, does seem like, just men racing around in fast cars. So to somebody like me, who is a complete amateur when it comes to all of this, can you explain the significance of this particular race, but also the significance of Max Verstappen actually winning this?
Well, let's take Max Verstappen first. Lewis Hamilton, as you know, has been winning the championships for he's won 7 world titles. And suddenly, a Red Bull and Max Verstappen, who's 24 years old, Lewis Hamilton is 36, will be 37 in January, get this young pretender coming along who really offers a serious challenge. And it has been the most fantastic season, to the point where you have to say either one of them would have been a worthy champion. It has been that good. But the fact that Max Verstappen has won the championship and has beaten Lewis Hamilton, who is the king, certainly of this decade, and people would argue decades past, that means a lot. It says everything about Verstappen, about how good he is, and about what a terrific future he's got. So that's the main takeaway, I think, from this series that we've had. We had 22 races, which is the longest season ever. Normally, there used to be about 16 or 17 races, then it's gradually crept up. For them to do 22 races is quite an achievement. And it's been nip and tuck all the way through. So they've been swapping the lead of the championships. They've been in a league of their own, these two, by the way, Hamilton and Verstappen. Nobody else has got close to them. And they've been swapping the lead of the championships right to the very end. So they go, believe it or believe it not, into the start of the final race, level in points. I've only known that happen once before in the history of Formula One. That was way back in 1974. So that tells you a little bit about the significance and the pressure that was being put on this particular race. And then the actual result to be settled in a very, very untidy and unsatisfactory way by the rules being read in a very strange fashion by the race director or referee has caused all this uproar at the end.
And Hamilton, I mean, obviously I know that Mercedes have launched a couple of complaints or whatever. How did Hamilton himself take it? Because I thought he looked relatively gracious yesterday. I saw him interviewed afterwards. I mean, and there he is, of course, clapping at the moment. You imagine, because you can't quite see his face, so he could be muttering anything underneath that mask, couldn't he? But how did he actually take it? Was he quite gracious?
He was, surprisingly so, considering that, it had been nip and tuck all the way, right the way through. He appeared to have got this race under control. Well, he had. It was absolutely under control. Verstappen had no answer to him, and to lose it on the last lap of 4,000, it's about over 4,000 miles of racing throughout this season, what we've had. And you come to the last 3.2 miles, and he loses it through what he would see as no fault of his own, because he was on different tyres to Verstappen. That's the way it panned out. And he was a sitting duck. So you would feel aggrieved, wouldn't you? But he took it in very good stead. He's been there before. I mean, he's lost championships before, way back in the beginning when his first season in 2007, he lost the championship at the final race in Brazil. So he knows how to handle it. And I must say, it was a nice touch to see both Lewis and his dad, who's played a big part in Lewis Hamilton's career, go and congratulate not only Max Verstappen, but also Max Verstappen's dad, because the synergy there is the same. Max's dad has brought him through. So there was a lot of, I think, very honourable procedures at the end between the two sides.
Absolutely. Well, Maurice, thank you very, very much. Maurice Hamilton there, who's, of course, a motorsport writer, just whizzing you through what was a fantastic climax to a fantastic Formula One season, actually. It was a lot closer than it normally is.
Yeah.
Of course, it went down right until the very last.
Yeah, I have to say, I hadn't considered how young Max is. 24, I think he said. I mean, that's a baby to me. I mean, I know I am only 2 years older, but still.
Incredible what he's achieved.
But very young. I mean, yeah, incredible. So
I wonder if it's going to be a bit of a changing of the guard moment, this now. Lewis Hamilton's won 7 World Championships. Verstappen's just edged him on this one. I wonder whether or not we're witnessing things changing now. But you can never write Lewis Hamilton off, so could you actually?
Yeah, I do wonder, is Formula One of those sports? Because we know that sportsmen and women, they have a short shelf life. That's quite a crude way to put it. But in terms of, they retire quite young, because obviously most sports are very physically intensive, and you get overtaken by younger people.
Literally.
Well, yeah, indeed. And I wonder if Formula One is the same, because it's not very physically intensive necessarily, is it? So can he go on into his 40s and 50s, maybe, Lewis Hamilton?
Quite possibly. I suppose it's a question of just whether or not he actually wants to. I'm pretty sure he'll always want to be at the very top, won't he? He'll always want to be, especially driving for a team as well that can compete at the very top. So, obviously, if they decide to get rid of him, I wonder whether or not he'd just call it a day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he's
not like he's going to be skint, is it?
No.
When he retires. So. But let's finish off with some of your views.
Sorry, I did quite like when you described Formula One as just a load of men driving around in cars. Essentially, you're not wrong.
Well, it's an accurate description of what it is.
Yeah. Anyway, right.
Very fast, very technically advanced cars.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna give you the final word here on To The Point. Thank you very much, everyone who's got in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Definitely one of our most emailed into shows. It's been fantastic to have you all on board. Yes, people calling into question the fact that there are no lateral flow test kits available anymore from this government. On the day, of course, that came after that Boris Johnson's announced, doesn't he, that we all need to be triple jabbed, probably quadruple jabbed.
And also, given the fact that you have to take a lateral flow test if you've come into contact with an Omicron or something of that nature, can't keep up with the rules these days, but the fact there is none when they're telling you have to take them in certain cases is problematic.
Yes, people saying this that they don't quite understand it, but also there are quite a lot of people out there who are saying leave Boris alone. He's only trying his best. So a range of views on this.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for joining us today. We will be back tomorrow, but that's it from us here at To The Point. But don't go away, because up next is the briefing with Gloria De Piero. But first, we'll bring you the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A three-way split with the weather this Monday. Bright and blustery across the far north. Some rain across parts of northern England and Wales in particular. In the far south, it's mild, but it's pretty murky. The three-way split caused by this waving weather front straddling across the UK. This low brought some very strong winds through the night and first thing across the Northern Isles, easing down a bit but staying blustery here. Showers across the Highlands, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland dry and bright. Then this damp zone covering parts of Yorkshire through to Lancashire and across North and West Wales, staying fairly soggy here. A bit damp and drizzly in the southwest, much of the south dry but predominantly cloudy. But it is mild here. Temperatures could get into the teens, whereas certainly single figures further north. Add on that wind and it feels pretty fresh. And the showers continuing to come in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the evening. The rain will trickle south, so turning damp and dank through South Wales and the Midlands for a time overnight. Some mist and fog is possible. Might just about drop down to freezing in one or two places, but certainly most towns and cities just about hovering above freezing and well above freezing in the south, staying very mild. But staying quite murky here, damp and drizzly for southern England, South Wales during Tuesday. Rain and light drizzle on and off throughout. Something a bit brighter for northern England, North Wales compared to today. Further rain coming in across western and northern parts of Scotland. But again, much of Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. Temperatures here again close to average, but again quite mild in the south with temperatures as high as 11 or 12 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, not a great deal of change. We've got a line of rain across the far northwest, some drizzly conditions over hills across western Scotland and North Wales, but otherwise most places dry, and that's how it's looking for much of the rest of this week. High pressure moving in, so most places dry from Tuesday onwards, often cloudy and increasingly could have some problems with fog.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria Di Piero. Lots coming up today. We've the latest reaction to COVID restrictions. We'll be asking if voter ID at polling stations when you vote is a good idea, and after the revelation that disgraced MP Andrew Griffiths raped his wife, Kate. I'm talking to the lawyer who defended her. Plus, I'll have a heartbreaking Real Me interview with Shadow Health Minister Andrew Gwynne. But first, it's the news.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 12 o'clock. The Prime Minister has confirmed at least one patient has died with the Omicron variant of coronavirus in the UK. Earlier this morning, the Health Secretary confirmed that around 10 people in England were hospitalised with the new strain. Meanwhile, people trying to order lateral flow tests from the government website are being told there are no more home testing kits available. In addition, the NHS says those experiencing waits online to book an appointment for their booster jab should try again tomorrow, as the website's experiencing high demand. Boris Johnson said the UK is facing a tidal wave of the new Omicron variant. In response, the government is accelerating the booster rollout. They've pledged to offer all 18-year-olds the chance to get the third jab by the end of the year. That's a target of 1 million jabs a day. Well, the Prime Minister also warned the rollout could be at the cost of other medical appointments. Virologist at the University of Warwick, Professor Lawrence Young, told GB News that these vaccinations will have a serious impact on people waiting for other treatments.
It's a real dilemma. It really is. And so I think we just have to be really concerned that what's going to happen over the next few weeks in this massive drive is going to mean we take our eye off the ball, and that backlog that was just starting to get to grips with that backlog or in GP practices and in hospitals is going to be further delayed, and that will have significant implications.
Thousands of people in England are now working from home as part of the government's Plan B measures, which came into force today. It also includes the reintroduction of masks in public places, and from Wednesday, vaccine passports for nightclubs and larger venues will be required. England now joins Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, who already have these restrictions. Chief Economic Strategist Gerard Lyons told GB News that working from home will hit the economy.
Pandemic's latest variant will probably knock the economy in December, in January, possibly into February as well. So there will be a temporary hit to the economy, but that should not result in permanent changes to policy. So we need to weather the storm and hopefully move as quickly as possible through these restrictions.
Now, in other news, 2 freight ships have collided off the southern coast of Sweden, leading to one of the vessels to capsize. At least 2 people have been reported as missing. Media reports that a British-registered Scot carrier and a Danish ship came together. Authorities in Sweden and Denmark say several Coast Guard vessels and helicopters have been sent to the scene. The US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid will be provided to 8 counties in the state to provide temporary housing and also help fund home repairs. The governor says he fears more than 100 people may have died in Kentucky alone. The disaster has impacted more than 5 states across the country. Now, in the UK, more than 500,000 learner drivers are waiting to take their test because of a backlog caused by coronavirus lockdowns. The figures come from the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, and the AA Driving School has warned the backlog is too long and a clear plan is needed. Tests were halted during the pandemic, with many facing significant delays to book a test. In Formula One, Red Bull says it'll fight any further appeals by Mercedes against world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. The result secured the Dutchman's first world championship. Formula One broadcaster Rosanna Tennant told GB News it was a bizarre finale.
Pretty controversial from the race director, the way they went about it. First of all, saying that the lapped cars didn't need to overtake the safety car, and then 4 minutes later, changing their mind and saying, yes, those cars were going to pass the safety car. And then, of course, all of the protests that followed the race. Interesting scenes to end a ridiculous season, really.
That's all your news for now. I'll have more in half an hour. Now, the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing. Christmas is coming, and so is a tidal wave of Omicron, according to the Prime Minister. I'm talking to Conservative MP Tim Lawton about what it means for us and the looming mutiny that the Prime Minister faces from his own side tomorrow. Last week, a judge found that former Conservative Minister Andrew Griffiths had raped his wife while she slept. Kate Griffiths, who is now the MP for Burton, waived her anonymity. I'll be talking to the lawyer who represented her. And you don't have to show any photo ID to turn up and vote, but the government thinks that needs to change. I'll be talking to Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. He'll explain a new report out today which finds it's not a good idea. And I'll have the latest in my series of interviews with MPs where we go behind the political persona to get to know the real person. This time, I talked to Labour's Andrew Gwynne. Now, you've got Christmas planned, but might you be stuck at home with COVID instead? Boris Johnson is warning us of a tidal wave of Omicron and urging us to get boosted. But if the Prime Minister had a rough week last week, this one might be even worse. Over 70 of his own MPs are plotting mutiny tomorrow when they vote on COVID restrictions. Well, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Tim Lawton, Conservative MP for East Worthing, and Shoreham. Good to see you, Tim. The Prime Minister has announced this morning the first death from Omicron. He said, I think the idea that this is a milder version of the virus is something we need to set to one side.
We've got to take it very seriously, absolutely. There's an interesting choice of words, though, because was it death from Omicron or death of somebody with Omicron? And that's not clear, because as we know, many people go into hospital either with another illness and pick up COVID and then die, but they've tested positive within 28 days. So there's always some suspicion about that. But look, this is a really serious variant, and we need to take it seriously. What I have concerns with, and the other 70 plus of my colleagues who are not plotting mutiny, we are plotting to scrutinise the legislation when it comes before us in a debate tomorrow. It's only us doing that. I'm afraid the Labour Party have decided to give a completely blank cheque to the government on all these regulations.
They say they're backing the Chief Medical Officer.
Giving a blank cheque to the Chief Medical Officer or the Prime Minister or whoever. And look, these are really serious measures. My concern is they can lead to even more restrictive, serious measures, which is lockdown creep, where I have serious reservations about that. I'm absolutely against mandatory vaccine passports. So we're going to look at all this tomorrow in Parliament. But nobody's saying we're not going to take this serious. Of course we are, but we need a proportionate response. We need the right response. And we need a response that people see is fair and proportionate and will abide by it. If they don't think it's fair, if they don't think it makes sense, it's not logical, people aren't going to abide by it. So you can have as many regulations as you like, they won't work.
Well, if you look at public support for these measures, face masks indoors, 80% support, working from home rule, 78%, COVID passports at large events and nightclubs, 72%. So actually, the Prime Minister's in line with the public on this.
Well, I'm not ideologically opposed to all of this, as some people seem to be portrayed as. I'm being pragmatic about it. I don't have a problem with masks. I've been wearing my mask on public transport and going into shops anyway. And I think extending that a bit, it's actually is helpful for people who are scared of coming out, people who are vulnerable. A lot of constituents are written to me saying, I think we should have masks because, you know, I'm uncertain about coming out. I think that's just considerate and it's not hugely restrictive. But then all this talk about COVID passports, now there's talk about having a pub passport. The hospitality industry is taking another hit. I've got a coastal constituency. Hospitality is a big industry. So my problem is this is actually all incremental towards much, much more restrictive regulations. We learnt, surely, in the last 18 months that some of these things were over the top and they were doing more damage to the economy, to people's well-being and to people's health elsewhere than actually COVID itself was. And COVID is not the only thing that's killing people at the moment. So let's put it into perspective. And that's why we want a proper debate, properly scrutinising what these measures are and what may come later on.
So it sounds like you're going to vote with the government on some things, but the COVID pass is the real red line for you.
Masks I don't have a problem with, but COVID passports, particularly mandatory vaccinations, which we think we're having a vote on tomorrow for the NHS staff, I'm against mandatory medical interventions, and vaccination is a medical intervention on principle, but also pragmatically, we've lost a lot of people from the care industry because it was brought in for care workers as from November. Many of those care workers actually then switched to work in the NHS, so it's going to catch up with them in March. We have 1.5 million people working in the NHS. A lot of those will be affected by this mandatory vaccination, and a lot of them will leave. And we've got a shortage of people in the NHS at the moment. We desperately need more people to come in. So this is going to provide big gaps in care.
Now, I'm trying to put my head in the head of the whips and what they might say to you.
Oh, that's a very dodgy thing to do.
They might say, look, there's been a really important by-election on Thursday. They might say, party disunity is really damaging. They might say this is all aimed at avoiding a full lockdown in the new year. Are you biddable? When you get that call, will they call you?
I think they gave up on me a long time ago. But I'm going to go to the debate. I'm hopefully going to participate in the debate, and I will listen to the debate, and I will make my mind up finally at the end. But on the basis of what I think we're going to be faced with at the moment, it's a definite no to passports because of passport creep ending up in mandatory vaccinations. I'm relaxed on masks. But the other problem is, if you remember a year or so ago, there was all this confusion of can you do this, can't you do this? You have to leave a pub at 10 o'clock, and then everybody sort of surged for the door, so spreading COVID supposedly, and then went to queue up outside Tesco's or the off-licence to buy their booze to take home where there's no social distancing. There was no logic. It didn't make sense. Now we're hearing work from home, but you can go to work for your office party. Well, that doesn't really make sense, does it? And what we don't want is a return to this. Well, that's illogical, that's self-contradictory, and sowing confusion in people's minds, and then they'll think, well, blow that for Game of Soldiers, I'm going to go off and have a party and do my own thing.
Now, the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, said when he was doing the media round yesterday that he would do everything in his power to keep schools open. He can't guarantee it, though. No, and he needs to guarantee it. I mean, if we learnt one thing from this pandemic, closing the schools was a big mistake. The impact that it's had on children, not just on academic falling behind, which is a problem, but perhaps even more seriously, the impact on mental health. So it's now calculated now at least 1 in 6 school-age children have got some form of mental health problem. The lack of socialising with their friends, that caused a huge amount of knock-on impact for them. But all we're concerned with is the COVID fatality and infection figures. We need to look at the bigger picture. It was wrong to close schools. Since schools reopened, they have done an amazing job of being flexible, trying to keep as many kids in the classroom as possible, taking appropriate measures, not sending home a whole year group or a whole bubble simply because one person at the other end of the school happens to have got COVID. I think they've managed it really well, not easy at all. So for goodness sake, let's keep those schools open. It should be the very last thing to close because the impact on our kids is immense beyond just catching COVID or not. And the kids are responsible for a lot of the spread at the moment, but it also means an awful lot of those kids are building up a herd immunity if they are getting low-level COVID without it having a serious impact on them, as it seems to be at the moment, and with very, very few kids ending up in hospital, fortunately. And finally, just going back to that vote tomorrow, Steve Baker, your colleague, reckons that up to half a dozen ministerial aides could quit the government ahead of that vote. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, it's possible. I mean, they're in a difficult position. I mean, old lags like me will say, look, no, I'm afraid I can't support the government on this, and give my reasons for it. And I hope I've given you some of the reasons. If you are a parliamentary bag carrier, as they're called, PPSs, which is the sort of just below minister level, you're not paid, but you are expected to toe the line with the government. And I know a number of those are very unhappy with having to go along with this, and if they are, and they have to vote against, then you have to resign your position. So they're in a difficult position. But, our bottom line is this going to keep people safer, looking at it in the round? And is this leading to something far more restrictive that I think would be very destructive? And I thought we'd learnt the lessons of some of the more extreme parts of lockdown that were counterproductive last year.
Tim Lawton, I always enjoy interviewing you. Very clear. I enjoy
being interviewed by you, Gloria.
It's a pleasure to see you again. If we don't see you before, Merry Christmas.
And you.
Now, last week, a judge found that disgraced former Tory minister Andrew Griffiths had raped his wife, Kate, as she slept. I'll be speaking with Dr. Charlotte Proudman, the barrister who represented Kate Griffiths, next. Before that, it's time for your weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A three-way split with the weather this Monday. Bright and blustery across the far north. Some rain across parts of northern England and Wales in particular. In the far south, it's mild, but it's pretty murky. The three-way split caused by this waving weather front straddling across the UK. This low brought some very strong winds through the night and first thing across the Northern Isles. Easing down a bit but staying blustery here. Showers across the Highlands, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland dry and bright. Then this damp zone covering parts of Yorkshire through to Lancashire and across North and West Wales, staying fairly soggy here. A bit damp and drizzly in the southwest. Much of the south dry but predominantly cloudy. But it is mild here. Temperatures temperatures could get into the teens, whereas certainly single figures further north. Add on that wind and it feels pretty fresh. And the showers continuing to come in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the evening. The rain will trickle south, so turning damp and dank through South Wales and the Midlands for a time overnight. Some mist and fog is possible, might just about drop down to freezing in one or two places, but certainly most towns and cities just about hovering above freezing and well above freezing in the south, staying very mild. But staying quite murky here, damp and drizzly for southern England, South Wales during Tuesday. Rain and light drizzle on and off throughout. Something a bit brighter for northern England, North Wales compared to today. Further rain coming in across western and northern parts of Scotland. But again, much of Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. Temperatures here again close to average, but again quite mild in the south with temperatures as high as 11 or 12 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, not a great deal of change. We've got a line of rain across the far northwest, some drizzly conditions over hills across western Scotland and North Wales, but otherwise most places dry, and that's how it's looking for much of the rest of this week. High pressure moving in, so most places dry from Tuesday onwards, often cloudy and increasingly could have some problems with fog.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family. Last Friday, a judge found that Conservative MP Kate Griffiths had been raped as she slept by her then husband, the disgraced former Tory minister, Andrew Griffiths. Well, the barrister who represented Kate Griffiths is Charlotte Proudman, and I'm delighted that she joins me now. Great to see you, Charlotte.
Hi, Gloria.
Tell me about the first time you met Kate Griffiths and how that meeting came about.
So I first met her in the Houses of Parliament, where she is a Member of Parliament, and I was having a meeting with her as her barrister, and I wanted to go through the details of her case with her, her family court case in which Andrew Griffiths was also the father of their child, and she had brought family proceedings along with him on the basis that their child would be at risk of harm if he were to have contact with the child, and certainly unsupervised contact. So I first met her in that context, and I remember it really vividly because I remember clearly the details of what she described, the harrowing information that she provided about what had happened behind closed doors when he was a minister and also a Member of Parliament, which frankly was just astonishing to see how someone can portray themselves in public, even supporting the upskirting bill and other women's initiatives, and then behind closed doors was raping his wife while she was asleep, abusing her and coercively controlling her, which continued post-separation. I think it's important to remember that even powerful men, in fact, sometimes many powerful men can abuse women and are not held accountable for it.
How difficult a decision was it for Kate to speak out?
I think it was an enormous decision for her. I mean, we spoke about it quite a lot, and she was aware of what the pros and the cons were. But Kate, being Kate, is a Member of Parliament with an enormous platform, and my God, what a remarkable person she is, an absolute feminist hero. She was just very clear about the fact that she wanted to champion other women's rights in the family courts, and especially victims of domestic abuse and rape like herself. And so she was really clear about the fact that she thought that publication would help other women come forward and speak out, as was I. And I know the enormous obstacles and barriers in the family court system, which she has experienced now firsthand. And the government's working on various consultations around changing the law in family proceedings. And I hope sincerely that she becomes part of that. And I know that that's something that she really wants to work on very hard for the women in her constituency.
About the nature of the cross-examining that she was subjected to in this case, the line of questioning she was subjected to.
So, I mean, in fact-find hearings, which are like trials, where the allegations are tested, his barrister was able to cross-examine her for a day and a half. And Kate Griffiths wrote in an article how difficult that was for her. She was cross-examined, as I say, for a day and a half. And it's a usual line of questioning. Well, why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you report it? You didn't go to the police. Therefore, it didn't happen. You're lying. And as Kate responded, she said, well, he told me no one would believe me because I'm an MP. So he used his position of power to silence her and to continue that silencing throughout the relationship and even after it, such that she felt so fearful in speaking out. So for her, when that judgment became public, she said that she felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders because no more was she silenced. The world knew what had happened. And that can be very powerful for victims, and feeling that they've been heard, be quite a cathartic experience for them. And I'm pleased for Kate it was that, because I remember calling her after the judgment was published at 2 p.m. on Friday, and I said, how do you feel? And she said, I feel free. And that to me just said everything, and I felt like my job is almost done. It's so powerful.
That is very powerful. Now, you mentioned at the start of the interview that the reason it was in the family courts was about access to their children. Just bring us up to date on that and what happened with the access to the children.
That's right. So the access to the child, it's still going on at the moment. And I've actually appealed a decision with Kate. And that decision made supervised contact continue between him, Andrew Griffiths, and the child, despite the serious findings of rape and domestic abuse and control, including him being abusive towards the child when he said to the child, who was just a few weeks old at the time, shut the F up. And of course, Kate's worried about him potentially losing his temper. So she thinks that her having to facilitate that contact as a rape victim is re-victimising, it's re-traumatising, and she's concerned about the impact on the child. And Gloria, not only that, she, as a rape victim, is having to subsidise his contact costs. So she's subsidising her rapist contact costs, which is just inexplicable. It really is. It's further abuse through the family courts. This should never, ever be allowed. And this is not just in Kate's case. I see this happen in many other cases where victims are paying perpetrators' costs. So the reason there's a cost incurred is because contact is supervised. It's in a contact centre, which means that there's someone always watching that contact happen because he's considered a risk to the child. And it was ordered that she ought to pay some of those costs, half of them, which I just think is so incredibly wrong. And so we're waiting for the outcome of that appeal, which will likely be made public as well. And then ultimately there'll be a final decision, which could take a year, it could take longer, when a final decision will be made about what contact he is safe to have with the child. But I know Kate is very keen on championing a change to the law to make it such that there would be a presumption of no contact between an abusive parent and their child, which I fully and wholeheartedly endorse.
Dr. Charlotte Proudman, really illuminating to talk to you. You've raised so many issues there, and we'd love to go further into the issue of family courts on a future show. But thank you for your time today, Dr. Charlotte Proudman there. Now, the government is keen to make you bring photo ID along when you go to vote, but a cross-party committee report on the government's election bill, which has been published today, says the evidence for doing so has simply not been good enough. Well, Labour MP for Kempton and Peacehaven, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, sits on that committee that produced the report and joins me now. Good to see you, Lloyd. Before we get onto the report, may I just ask you if you are going to be, voting with the Labour Party and the government tomorrow on COVID restrictions?
I think I probably will. It is uneasy, and with all of these restrictions, it is about reducing civil liberty. Wearing a mask is about reducing civil liberty. Lockdowns are about reducing civil liberty. It is about a balance, about whether it makes a difference and whether it's proportional. And because they have allowed you to take tests, and it is only for nightclubs that are over 500 people or big outdoor events over a few thousand people, and there is no suggestion that that would increase at this time. And if it did increase, there would have to be another vote in Parliament. And with all of those things, you can take a negative test if you don't want to have a vaccine. I think on that level, I'm happy to support it. And on the NHS workers, there is a precedent of some NHS workers being able to take, having to take certain other vaccines to continue jobs. There is a precedent there. That is the one that I'm most worried about, because the unions flagged up some problems. And so we are still in some discussions with the unions about that. But I suspect I will be supporting it.
Thanks very much for that. Now, let's look at the report that your committee has published today on the need for us to take photo ID to vote in elections. Is it that hard to get some photo ID to take? Research commissioned by the government found 96% of respondents had suitable photo ID with a picture.
Well, first of all, the government's reports and their trials, because they've trialled this out, shows that around 3% of people would turn up to the polling station and be sent away. Now, they might have the ID down the back of a sofa, but in almost all cases, none of those people returned. I mean, if you made your way down to the polling station on a dark night, you're not suddenly going to whip back down later on. That is, to give you the figures, that's 2,000 people per seat that are likely to be turned away from this. We've got 70 seats in Parliament where that is the majority. So it could make a difference to an outcome of a general election. It would make a difference to the last outcome of the general election, and for sure it would have made a difference on the 2017 general election. It could have made a difference even who was in government. Now, that is, I think, quite shocking that this one change could make such a big difference, and I think that's why we've got to be very careful. But the other problem is, and I don't particularly support ID at all, but you've got this farcical thing that you might turn up and the person at the polling station might know who you are because they're your neighbours, live in the same town or village as you, but they won't be able to accept you in unless you've got the right kind of ID. And the right kind of ID will be, of course, a passport, a driving licence, a Ministry of Defence card, or an old person's travel card. If you were a young person and turned up with your young person's rail card, which has a photo ID on it, all of them do, they wouldn't be able to accept that. If you turned up with your college card or your work card, for example, many people have ID for the workplace, you wouldn't be able to use that either. And so there's also a problem with them drawing the line so narrowly. All that needs to be proved is there is a high likelihood that that person is who they say they are.
OK, and just finally, I'm sorry that we're running short of time. The report also says that ID would cause additional barriers for particular groups, such as disabled people, transgender and non-binary voters, and black and ethnic minority groups. Why those groups in particular? I think we may have lost Lloyd Russell while we lost Lloyd. We will speak to him again in the future, no doubt. After the break, we have an exclusive interview with Labour MP Andrew Gwynne. He opens up about the death of his mother and his struggles with his mental health. First, the news.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Prime Minister has confirmed at least one patient has died with the Omicron variant of coronavirus. Earlier this morning, the government also confirmed that around 10 people in England are hospitalised with the new strain.
Sadly, yes, Omicron is producing hospitalisations, and sadly at least one patient has now been confirmed to have died with Omicron. So I think the idea that this is somehow a milder version of the virus, I think that's something we need to set on one side and just recognise the sheer pace at which it accelerates through the population.
Meanwhile, people trying to order lateral flow tests from the government website are being told there are no more home testing kits available. Boris Johnson, though, says there is a ready supply of the tests and recommended getting them in shops and pharmacies. In addition, the NHS says those experiencing waits online to book an appointment for their booster jab should try again tomorrow, as the website experiences high demand. Now, in other news, the US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid will be provided to 8 counties to provide temporary housing and help fund home repairs. The state governor says he fears more than 100 people have died in Kentucky alone. The disaster has impacted more than 5 states across America. Red Bull says it will fight any further appeals by Mercedes against Formula One world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. You are right up to date. I'll be back with more on today's news in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now it's time for the latest in my series of interviews with MPs, where we go behind the politics and get to know the real person. I spoke to Labour MP and Shadow Health Minister Andrew Gwynne about his lifelong struggle with mental health. He began by telling me the dreadful day his mother died.
Probably the worst day of my life, if I'm being honest. I didn't know my mum had cancer. She wanted to keep that from me. I just started at higher education college in Wales, staying away from home, and I think she thought, rightly probably, that if I knew how poorly she was, I would give that up to come and look after her. An only child. Mum's mean a lot to their boys, and she meant the world to me. And so I just knew she'd been poorly. She'd gone in to have a colostomy bag fitted. When they cut her open, her ovarian cancer had spread. She was riddled with it, so they just sewed her back up. We got an early morning call. My dad told me to get dressed, got out of bed. There's only one reason why you get a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning. When somebody's in hospital, and I've never seen anybody in as much pain as my mum was in. She was in absolute pain. Her eyes were rolling back. She was just in an end bed in an old Victorian ward with a curtain wrapped around her, and we sat with her, and that's when my dad told me that she had cancer. I don't think my mum was best pleased, actually, because although she couldn't really speak, she could communicate with her eyes. And I think even at that late stage, she was like, I don't want him to know. And then we were given a really tough decision by the nurses. They said, look, your mum, your wife has got an hour or so left to live and it will be in pain, or we can give another injection of morphine, which is what we decided to do. Out of kindness and compassion, but it's not ever a decision you want a 19-year-old to be there having to take. So that day will probably haunt me for the rest of my life.
What are the psychological effects of going through something like that and witnessing something like that at the age of 19?
Oh, it's affected most of my adult life. I mean, even just small things like your graduation, your mum's not there. Bringing your girlfriend home, your mum's not there. Probably a good thing, because the standards would have been set probably much higher than my dad set them. Although I think Alison would have passed. I'm certain she would.
That's your wife.
Yeah. The birth of your children. And then them growing up and all the stages, because I had brilliant grandparents, absolutely the best grandparents you could ask for. They missed out on having a gran or a nana like I had. So it's just little things like that as well. And that never goes away. It doesn't get any easier. I'm 47 now and I still miss my mum.
I know you're now on, or I think you're now on antidepressants. I know you have been on antidepressants. You are still, and we'll explore that in a bit more detail later. Did you go into depression soon after you lost your mum?
Pretty much, yeah. I didn't recognise it as depression, it was just grieving. But the kind of the Churchill always talked about the black dog, and there is such a thing. Right. And the black dog never left. Sometimes he'd be in his kennel a little bit, you know, but was always there. You were always aware that that cloud was there, that something was missing, that the spark had gone out, kind of thing. And it was years later, Member of Parliament by this stage, and John Bercow was the Speaker. He'd invested a lot of his resources as Speaker into helping MPs and MP staff who were experiencing mental health difficulties. And so I went to speak to John. He mentioned these services that were available, went to occupational health, and it kind of flowed from there, and eventually was able to have some really good sessions where I could talk about my feelings. And the doctor at the House of Commons, absolutely incredible lady, and she said, look, it's not a sign of weakness. These pills can make you feel better, normal, whatever that means. Just try them. And I did. And I remember waking up one morning feeling normal, feeling like I did as a child, without a worry, without any of the stresses. Remember the 2017 general election had been called. And I was the most senior person of the front bench who unfortunately was in London at just that particular moment. And so I was sent from Labour headquarters down to College Green. And of course, you've got to put on a bit of a show. We were 25% behind in the polls, and, you know, we were facing a drubbing. And you've got to convince the world that there is a Labour Party worth voting for on day one of a general election. And I remember being asked about what Labour's chances are, and we're in it to win it, and of course we can fight to win, and we're in it to pick up seats, and put on my usual brave face. And the interviewer said, Mr. Gwynne, you're 25% behind in the opinion polls. Why are you so cheery? And I just laughed and said, oh, it's the pills, not the polls. And it was only after the Evening Standard, 9 months after that general election, ran a piece on my mental health. I spoke to them about it, and Kevin Maguire stopped me in the lobby, and he said to me, "I remember you saying it's the pills, not the polls." And I thought, what a great line! I didn't realise you were actually on the pills.
Do you think you'll be on pills for the rest of your life? When you talk, do you ever think, oh, should I still be on these pills? Do I need to wean myself off? Tell me what goes through your mind when
I've never really thought about it. I mean, there is a danger that they become a bit of a crutch, and if I don't need them, then probably there's a time to wean yourself off them. But how do you know when that time is? I only feel good probably because I'm medicated, and whatever chemical imbalance I've got going on in my body, that fixes it. The moment you stop taking them, will that chemical imbalance return? So my doctor's fairly easy about me being on them, and I'm perfectly happy to take them. It makes me feel normal.
Any side effects?
No.
So it's just win-win.
It's win-win. I take a pill and I feel my good self.
Do you have talking therapies? Have you had talking therapy?
I did have. That was part of the speakers programme. And I only had 6 sessions, but being able to talk about some of those dark periods, particularly when my mum died, that really helped. And it helped me rationalise it and understand some of the background to it, and why she didn't want me to know, and why my dad was protective of me. And, you know, it's for the best reasons. My mum was a working class girl from Wythenshawe. She was incredibly bright, super bright. She went to the grammar school, she passed her 11 plus, she got really good O-levels, probably would have gone on to do A-levels, but the circumstances of the family. Her dad fell ill, he was a docker at Manchester Ship Canal, at Salford Docks. Income had to come in, so my mum went to work. She was determined, which I think is a proper working class value. She was determined that her child would have all the opportunities that she wasn't able to have, and she made damn sure I got them.
It's not just losing your mum. Your late Auntie Sue was a heroin addict who was jailed for a time too.
She was.
How old were you when this was happening?
Oh, I was probably about 12 to 16 when that was all happening. I mean, Sue had incredible personal problems. I think there is a bit of mental ill health that runs in the family, to be fair. But Sue was such a remarkable, strong woman. She's one of the few people I would ever known that if she sets her mind to something, she will do it just out of sheer bedevilment because she can. And she decided one day when she was in prison that she was coming off drugs. Usually people have the opposite route when they go into prison, and she came out of prison clean. And she didn't touch drugs again. She still had alcohol problems, but she tackled those, and in her latter years didn't touch alcohol again, and actually went on to volunteer and then work for the National Health Service to mentor people who were going through the same traumas, which is just remarkable. And she was a very strong woman who could put her mind to anything.
And your uncle, on the other side, I believe, who you described as like an older brother, he killed himself.
He did. So my Uncle Brian, my dad's youngest brother, had mental health issues as well. And it was just 2 years after my mum died. He took his life. He attached a hose pipe to a car exhaust and was found in a beautiful part of the Peak District, a place that he loved. He used to take me and my other cousins camping in Edale. We had such happy memories because he was the youngest of 6. So actually for him, the cousins were more like his younger brothers and sisters than his brothers and sisters were.
So there is definitely mental health struggles in your family.
There is.
What's been your lowest point?
Oh, the lowest point. I mean, there have been difficult points in my life, but I have to say, I think the lowest point is losing my mum at 19, because you don't get over that.
She'd be incredibly proud of what you've achieved.
She would. I don't think she ever envisaged me being a member of Parliament, and that would have just blown her mind. And also my grandparents as well, particularly on my mum's side, because they were, proper working class. My granddad was a docker, as I said, and his dad, who was killed tragically in the First World War, was a docker, and his dad was a docker, and they moved up from Portsmouth, where they obviously developed their dock labouring skills, and moved up to the new Manchester Ship Canal when it opened at the end of the 19th century. And I remember being at Westminster Abbey for the centenary of the armistice, the big service that they had with Her Majesty the Queen and senior members of government, and I was there as the Shadow Communities Secretary, and just sitting there and thinking, firstly, if my granddad could have seen me now as a Member of Parliament, but secondly, if his dad, who was killed just after the Battle of the Somme, could see his grandson not only as a Member of Parliament, but sitting a few rows away from the Queen at the Armistice Centenary, that would just have blown his mind. Those things didn't happen to people like them or their families.
You mentioned the 2017 general election. You were quite a big figure during that election. You were on the tally a lot. You were representing the party. You were in the shadow cabinet. You were coordinating the general election.
Yeah, had a couple of tussles with Boris.
Do you miss being right on the front line?
It was difficult, and if I'm being brutally honest, they weren't happy years. I enjoyed it though. It's the cut and thrust. We're politicians. We like that. And I felt that I could add something to 2017 that I just wasn't able to do in 2019. But they were difficult, and we lost colleagues. We lost fewer colleagues in 2017 than we did in 2019. You don't come into politics to lose. I want the Labour Party to get its thirst for power back. For the right reasons, not because we're all egotistical and we want to be sitting on the government benches and fluff ourselves up as ministers. politics is a force for good. We're all in politics, I hope, for the right reasons, to change this country for the better, to help people to improve their lives, to leave a better world for our children and grandchildren than the one we've inherited. You can't do that from the opposition benches, and until we get that thirst for power to put things right, to do things for the better, to really change people's lives, to transform people's lives and life chances, it's just a frustration. You don't get that in opposition, and I've been on the opposition benches for 11 years. It's 11 years too long.
You mentioned about your working class heritage.
Yeah.
Your party's got a major problem with working class people.
Has. And
I don't think it recognises the scale of that problem, do you?
I recognise the scale of it. You know, it sounds really cheesy. I always say when I'm asked by kids in local schools, what's special about being an MP, and it's not that you can change the law and you can help people and you can do really good things. For me, it's an extra special privilege to represent where I've always lived, grown up, gone to school, brought my own family up. If I mess up, I've still got to go home and look my friends, family and neighbours in the face. And, you know, I'm very aware of the disconnect between the Labour Party and what you would traditionally call Labour voters. Very aware of that. And it's not something that's new. It's not something that could be pinned on Keir Starmer or on Jeremy Corbyn or on Ed Miliband. It's actually been around for quite some time, including a time when we were in government.
Well, hang on. I mean, you still represented Ashfield and you know...
No, absolutely.
Actually, do represent Barnsley, but, you know, Stoke and all those seats, you don't need to Sedgefield.
But the disconnect had already started. It's been exacerbated over recent years as we've been further away from power. But some of the things that, you know, people say to me, why didn't Labour do this? Why didn't Labour do that? And actually, there are sound arguments as to why we should have done more in what we call heartland seats. I actually wish we'd been as politically ruthless as the Tories now are in these same seats, because the Tories are using power to do the things that, quite frankly, we ought to have used our 13 years in power to do. They're doing it for solely political reasons, not altruistic reasons. They've worked a route to getting a majority through the Red Wall. And so when it comes to the Levelling Up Fund, when it comes to investing in towns, when it comes to infrastructure and all the announcements that they're making, they are honed into a political set of seats that they have to hold. And that is causing us great damage.
Straight talking and heartbreaking too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew Gwynne. I do love doing those interviews. We've got another one for you on Thursday this week, and it's a happy one. You have been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. Then I will join Liam Halligan. We'll be together at 2 o'clock with Liam. But for now, I'll leave you with your weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A three-way split with the weather this Monday. Bright and blustery across the far north. Some rain across parts of northern England and Wales in particular. In the far south, it's mild, but it's pretty murky. The three-way split caused by this waving weather front straddling across the UK. This low brought some very strong winds through the night and first thing across the Northern Isles. Easing down a bit but staying blustery here. Showers across the Highlands, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland dry and bright. Then this damp zone covering parts of Yorkshire through to Lancashire and across North and West Wales, staying fairly soggy here. A bit damp and drizzly in the southwest. Much of the south dry but predominantly cloudy. But it is mild here. Temperatures could get into the teens, whereas only single figures further north. Add on that wind and it feels pretty fresh. And the showers continuing to come in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the evening. The rain will trickle south, so turning damp and dank through South Wales and the Midlands for a time overnight. Some mist and fog is possible, might just about drop down to freezing in one or two places, but certainly most towns and cities just about hovering above freezing and well above freezing in the south, staying very mild. But staying quite murky here, damp and drizzly for southern England, South Wales during Tuesday. Rain and light drizzle on and off throughout. Something a bit brighter for northern England, North Wales compared to today. Further rain coming in across western and northern parts of Scotland. But again, much of Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. Temperatures here again close to average, but again quite mild in the south with temperatures as high as 11 or 12 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, not a great deal of change. We've got a line of rain across the far northwest, some drizzly conditions over hills across western Scotland and North Wales, but otherwise most places dry, and that's how it's looking for much of the rest of this week. High pressure moving in, so most places dry from Tuesday onwards, often cloudy and increasingly could have some problems with fog.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
And welcome to a whole new week of On the Money. It's your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about the UK's cost of living crisis, and in particular how, according to a new report, regional inequalities have widened during the pandemic. Plus, We'll be reporting on a brand new train service from the northeast to London. And our in-depth Money Talks interview is with a TV boss who decided to make money by distilling gin. All that after the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. Let's get you up to date at 1 o'clock. The Prime Minister has confirmed at least one patient has died with the Omicron variant of coronavirus in the UK. Earlier this morning, the government confirmed that around 10 people in England were in hospital with the new strain.
Sadly, yes, Omicron is producing hospitalisations, and sadly at least one patient has now been confirmed to have died with Omicron. So I think the idea that this is somehow a milder version of the virus, I think that's something we need to set on one side and just recognise the sheer pace at which it accelerates through the population.
Meanwhile, people trying to order lateral flow tests from the government website are being told there are no more home testing kits available. Boris Johnson, though, says there is a ready supply of tests and recommended getting them in shops and pharmacies. In addition, the NHS says those experiencing waits online to book an appointment for their booster jabs should try again tomorrow, as the website experiences high demand. The Ministry of Defence has said around 750 servicemen and women will help deliver boosters and coordinate the rollout in England and Scotland. The Prime Minister's also warned the rollout could be at the cost of other medical appointments. Virologist at the University of Warwick, Professor Lawrence Young, told GB News that these vaccinations will have a serious impact on people waiting for other treatments.
It's a real dilemma. It really is. And so I think we just have to be really concerned that what's going to happen over the next few weeks in this massive drive is going to mean we take our eye off the ball, and that backlog that was just starting to get to grips with that backlog or in GP practices and in hospitals is going to be further delayed, and that will have significant implications.
Thousands of people in England are now working from home as part of the government's Plan B measures, which come into force today. Transport for London say it saw a reduction in its usage this morning. Tube services saw 1 million journeys made, an 18% decrease, while bus services saw a 5% decline. Chief Economic Strategist Gerard Lyons told GB News that working from home will hit the economy.
The pandemic's latest variant will probably knock the economy in December, in January, possibly into February as well. So there will be a temporary hit to the economy, but that should not result in permanent changes to policy. So we need to weather the storm and hopefully move as quickly as possible through these restrictions.
Two freight ships have collided off the southern coast of Sweden, leading to one of the vessels capsizing. At least 2 people have been reported as missing. Media reports that a British-registered Scot carrier and a Danish ship came together. Authorities in Sweden and Denmark say several Coast Guard vessels and helicopters have been sent to the scene. The US president has declared a major disaster in Kentucky after a series of powerful tornadoes ripped through the state. Joe Biden announced additional aid will be provided to 8 counties to provide temporary housing and help fund home repairs. The governor says he fears more than 100 people may have died in Kentucky alone. The disaster has impacted more than 5 states across the country. More than 500,000 learner drivers in the UK are waiting to take their test because of a backlog caused by coronavirus lockdowns. The figures come from the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. The AA driving school has warned the backlog is too long and a clear plan is needed. Tests were halted during the pandemic, with many facing significant delays to book a test. In Formula One, Red Bull says it will fight any further appeals by Mercedes against world champion Max Verstappen's victory in Abu Dhabi. Officials have already rejected 2 protests from Lewis Hamilton's team after a dramatic season-ending race. Verstappen stormed past his title rival in the closing stages after benefiting from a late safety car. The result secured the Dutchman's first world championship. You're up to date. I'll be back at 1:30. Now return to On the Money.
And this is On the Money. Now, it's 2 years yesterday since the last general election when Boris Johnson won his House of Commons majority. Yet a new study shows that millions of red wall voters, those who put the Prime Minister in Downing Street, have got poorer during this pandemic. We'll host a detailed discussion. Plus, our in-depth Money Talks interview today is with Ian McCulloch, the former commercial director at ITV, who changed career paths in 2014 when he founded Silent Pool Gin, one of the UK's fastest-selling spirits, now sold across 32 countries worldwide. Ian will be telling us what drew him to the spirit world later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of today's discussion? Get in touch. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @GBNews. We'll read out some of your emails later in the show, so stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan. You're on the money. Now, over recent weeks, the UK's political and media class has been fixated on everything from Conservative Party politics to shenanigans in 10 Downing Street to the new Omicron variant. While these are all important issues, it strikes me that what's consistently mattered to millions of voters over recent months is the UK's cost of living crisis. So during this show, at least, that will be our focus. Already, UK inflation, another way of describing the rise in the cost of living, hit 4.2% during October, over twice the Bank of England's official 2% target. The inflation figure for November, to be published this coming Wednesday, is likely to be higher still. Even the Bank of England's chief economist says inflation could soon comfortably exceed 5%, in his words. And if that happened, the cost of living would be rising at its fastest rate across the UK for 30 years. A new survey shows a record number of UK manufacturers are now raising their prices as supply chain cost pressures start to bite, which will push up prices in the shops even more. But it's already clear that as the cost of living has risen during this pandemic, the poor have been hardest hit. Inequalities worsened during lockdown, with the gap between rich and poor getting wider. Over the last 2 years, the wealthiest 5% of families have seen their disposable incomes rise by £3,300 a year, according to a new study from the New Economics Foundation. Half of UK families have seen their disposable income shrink. The poorest 50% of households, meanwhile, have seen their incomes squeezed, becoming £110 poorer. There's a clear pattern here. Many high earners in white-collar jobs, often in London and the South East, have done pretty well out of lockdown, thank you, carrying on their jobs from home while saving money on commuting. Hence the rise in their disposable income once they've paid all their expenses. By contrast, many working in sectors that have suffered most during lockdown, hospitality, tourism and so on, are already relatively poor and perhaps work in the so-called gig economy. So they've lost out on work without qualifying for furlough payments. The New Economic Foundation calculates there are now around 300,000 more families in poverty than there were in early 2019. The gap in incomes across regions has also widened in the last 2 years, with so-called red wall constituencies, those former Labour strongholds that are supposed to benefit from the government's levelling up agenda, the worst hit. Now, the government spent at least £200 billion on COVID support measures, an enormous sum. Yet, according to this new report, even with extensive furlough measures, business support loans and all the rest of it, inequalities still become more acute during this pandemic, with the UK's poorest regions suffering most. So as the government considers new anti-COVID measures, perhaps even renewed lockdown, that's your on-the-money question today. Could anti-COVID measures derail the government's levelling up agenda? Here at On The Money, we have grown-up conversations with people who really know their stuff. So today, we asked on Alfie Sterling, Director of Research, Chief Economist at the New Economics Foundation, the organisation behind the new report that we're focusing on. We also have Helen Barnard, Deputy Director at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, another stellar organisation with a long track record of exposing and working to address poverty across the UK. And in the studio, friend of the show, co-founder of Regionally, Justin Urquhart Stewart, talking about everything financial. Let's go first to you, Alfie. It is a pretty powerful report, I thought, quite eye-catching, particularly now. That's why we've based our show on it today. What really strikes you from this study from the New Economic Foundation?
No, I think you're right. I think that the figures speak for themselves and are striking. Clearly, those headline numbers. You know, a £3,300 increase in incomes for the very richest 5%, compared with right across the board for the lower 50% of income families. They've actually been squeezed, and they've been squeezed between about £30 a year right up to £260 a year, and an average of 110. So a widening of inequality, not just maintaining existing inequalities, but widening. And even within that top half, you know, the richest getting richer 8 times faster than the rest in the top half. So it all over the distribution. Everything's going in the wrong direction. And across regions, this, you know, the really stark increase in incomes in London, even the very poorest in London, in fact, have seen an increase in their incomes, whereas right across the board, the poorest have lost income in the rest of the country. And on average, incomes have grown 6 times less fast across the north of England, the West Midlands, than in London. So these figures speak for themselves. And I think, you know, widening of inequality is an indictment on any government, but for one where levelling up has been put at the heart of their political and policy agenda, it really is hugely damaging for a government that's committed itself to that, to that agenda.
Helen Barnard of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, thanks so much for appearing on the show. We really appreciate you being with us. This government spent £250 billion on business and household support measures during this period of anti-COVID restrictions and indeed successive lockdowns. And still, according to this new Economic Foundation report, inequality widened, and that inequality widened most and poverty increased most in some of the poorest parts of the UK. Does that suggest, whatever we might think of anti-COVID restrictions, whatever we might think of lockdown, that however much the government spends, and it certainly spent a huge amount, that lockdown will increase poverty?
So I think we have to look at different bits of spending. So I think some of that spending was really well targeted. So the boost to universal credit, which helped the poorest people both in and out of work, that was a very good use of money, because we know those families, even with that help, were often going without essentials. A lot of them have got into debt, run down savings. So that was a vital protection. But the government also spent £6 billion on a stamp duty holiday, which basically funneled money to pretty well-off people with very valuable houses, which have got more and more valuable during the pandemic. So I think it is about making sure the money that's spent is good value and goes to the people that need it most. I mean, I think in terms of the lockdown effect, you always have to balance, don't you? Because lockdowns are tough for everybody, but the alternative, if the alternative is we get a much worse wave of COVID again, like we did at the beginning of last year, that is also terrible, both for health and for the economy. So I think, the government has to pick its path very carefully through those. But I do think we can learn from some of the less well-targeted spending last year about not renewing those kinds of things like stamp duty holidays, which just pump up a housing market that is already out of reach for so many people.
What do you make of that, Justin? Obviously, New Economic Foundation, very reputable. They can add up. They do their sums. Centre-left perspective, but clearly this is a well-sourced report. And you've heard there from Helen Barnard of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Pretty stellar. Well, how do you respond to what they've said?
Helen, I think is absolutely right. So some areas were very well focused, because that payment to everybody in terms of the tax credit, absolutely spot on. It's going to get spent. That's what you do know when you give money to the poorer ends. They're going to need that money. It's guaranteed to be spent. So greater focus on what's necessary. But the other issue is, and this is what you often hear, is people saying, yes, but we need more government investment. Well, let's get away from this. Actually, what you need to be able to do is encourage more investment. There is no shortage of money in the UK. Yeah. It's just that it's focused, most of it, in South East and London. More of it gets focused on London. Even when you're dealing with things like HS2, it just brings more business to London. What we need to have is a much clearer regional policy to enable those regions to attract more investment. So regional enterprise investment schemes, not just doling out money from the government, but actually making sure regional money is funneled into those regions.
Alfie, we're going to carry on this discussion over the break, but just before we go to the break, briefly from you, what would you say to the government if you had 30 seconds in an elevator with Boris Johnson? It may be that we're going to have renewed anti-COVID restrictions. There's clearly a live debate going on, not least in the House of Commons. But if there are new restrictions coming in, what should we do differently this time to support low-income households that we didn't do last time?
So I think Helen's completely spot on. The answer isn't to put in place COVID restrictions. If you let the virus run riot, it will have also devastating consequences, not only for public health, but also livelihoods. And that will hit a gradient of existing inequalities and be worse outside of London than in London. But I would say the key message is when you're thinking about your policy design, don't think about policies that just protect the status quo, i.e. shield the current economy from the pandemic, because you're just preserving existing inequalities, and in fact, in the case of the last 12 months, making them worse because of clear gaps in terms of those out of work, those are self-employed. So think actively about how your protection policies take you on an agenda towards actually delivering levelling up. So that's more support for those out of work, more support for those in the regions outside London and the southeast, and getting to families directly, which is perhaps better sometimes than going via businesses.
Hold that thought, Alfie, because we're going to carry on this discussion after the break with Alfie from the New Economic Foundation, with Helen Barnard from Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and indeed from Justin Urquhart Stewart. We'll keep this important debate going after the break. Your emails are flooding in. I knew this subject would get you going. We'll be reading out some of those shortly. Stay with us. You're on the money.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A three-way split with the weather this Monday. Bright and blustery across the far north. Some rain across parts of northern England and Wales in particular. In the far south, it's mild, but it's pretty murky. The three-way split caused by this waving weather front straddling across the UK. This low brought some very strong winds through the night and first thing across the Northern Isles, easing down a bit but staying blustery here. Showers across the Highlands, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland dry and bright. Then this damp zone covering parts of Yorkshire through to Lancashire and across North and West Wales, staying fairly soggy here. A bit damp and drizzly in the southwest, much of the south dry but predominantly cloudy. But it is mild here. Temperatures could get into the teens, whereas certainly single figures further north. Add on that wind and it feels pretty fresh. And the showers continuing to come in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the evening. The rain will trickle south, so turning damp and dank through South Wales and the Midlands for a time overnight. Some mist and fog is possible. Might just about drop down to freezing in one or two places, but certainly most towns and cities just about hovering above freezing and well above freezing in the south, staying very mild. But staying quite murky here, damp and drizzly for southern England, South Wales during Tuesday. Rain and light drizzle on and off throughout. Something a bit brighter for northern England, North Wales compared to today. Further rain coming in across western and northern parts of Scotland. But again, much of Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland will be dry and bright. Temperatures here again close to average, but again quite mild in the south with temperatures as high as 11 or 12 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, not a great deal of change. We've got a line of rain across the far northwest, some drizzly conditions over hills across western Scotland and North Wales, but otherwise most places dry, and that's how it's looking for much of the rest of this week. High pressure moving in, so most places dry from Tuesday onwards, often cloudy and increasingly could have some problems with fog.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.